Hello, and welcome everybody to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Tonight, Witan Svan returns, and we begin our study of the Hávamál. Before we do that, and right at the top of the program, I'd like it if producer Nick can throw the link to the Bellows translation of the Hávamál that we will be reading from, so folks can follow along. Also, and this might be fun too if you're just looking to be different, any other translation of the Hávamál you would like. We don't have one that we specifically recommend. I suppose we have several that we specifically recommend, but I don't think you're going to do wrong by picking any of them that you find and finding one that you like, and perhaps noticing where it's different than the Bellows translation. So yeah, and this is handy, and I reserve the right to change this down the line, but I think this is the one that we might be using for quite a bit of our lore episodes as they continue. It's the same one we used for our Volospau study.
I did want to make a recommendation. It has the Bellows translation, but it also has some other translations right next to it. There is another website called awakenthenorth.org that has Thorpe, Bellows, Hollander, and Auden Taylor all right next to each other, but no Old Norse.
So that's one of the things there. You can find a lot of different sources. Many of you may have physical copies in hand if you're looking on here. And I suppose all too often on the show, I assume everybody is watching it, and that's not always the case. A lot of people are listening to it as a podcast as well on Spotify. Those come out on Friday. So in that case, Volospa.org is the website that we're going to be reading from. Some notes for the top of the program. We have Charming of the Plow at Njordshof in White Springs, Florida, coming up just over 2 weeks from now, and I'm pretty excited about that. It's going to be fantastic. I will be down there for that. I would love to see you guys there if you can make it. If you're interested in going, please get with your local folk builder, and they can get you all set up. There's also a link that Nick is putting up now. But if you can make it, it's worth it. It's a beautiful time to be in Florida. It's not muggy and gross yet, but it is sunny and beautiful. It's going to be an amazing time. Come check out Njordshof, and I'd love to meet you. And if I have already met you, I'd love to get to catch up with you and see how you've been. Also, if you can't make it to Charming of the Plow, or even if you can, we've got Ostara at Thorshof coming up in March. It's another one that I will be attending. I'm very excited about that. It's a beautiful Hof. It's amazing. It's one of the most powerful murals that Svan's ever painted. It was his first one, and it's spectacular. Great people there, so I look forward to seeing you there if you can make it. And that one's in March, the 22nd to the 24th. We have that one. Nick's got the graphic up. Again, if you'd like to make it, reach out to your local folk builder, and they can see about making that happen. I think that's what we got on top of the program here. Just another note, if anybody wants to participate in super chats or to throw up a donation for us, they're much appreciated. You can do that. The instructions for doing that are in the description of this video, and there's all kind of little bells and whistles to do that and have fun with it. So we appreciate you guys in advance. And I think with that we can. Oh, just a side note. Tracy Young over in the chat room, new member. Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you. And you mentioned earlier this is your first time listening to Victory Never Sleeps. So welcome and feel free to ask any questions you want. Also, it goes for everybody else. So similar to, or the exact same as how we did in the Lustbau episodes, but different from the typical VNS format. Please ask any and all questions you want. Svan and I will stay on and answer all those questions. We're going to try to answer the ones that are really pertinent to the current study while we're reading the text, and go back and get all the more random or unrelated questions afterwards. But don't be offended if we skip yours. It's not because we're not going to answer it. It's just because we're wait until the end of the show to do it. Yeah, with that, Svan, can you start by telling them a little bit about the Hávamál itself and about the etymology of the name Hávamál?
Hávamál. Yeah, Hávamál is, I mean, it gets translated in different ways. And you got to understand that there have been a lot of people that have done translations. And so generally it will be referred to as the sayings of Haur. And that can translate to the sayings of the High One, the words of the High One, the words of just the High. But it would be more like directly translate, like Halva is high or aloft and of great value, or great, like the word zenith. That's what I would always kind of compare it to, is when we think of zenith, what does zenith mean? It means the highest point of an arc or of an ascendance, and then after that it's a descendance. So it's kind of like a zenith, and it's the words of the zenith. And I know that's kind of it's more of a foreign or an outside Teutonic word, but it does capture kind of the reason why the translations kind of hop. And I really like that idea, that it's remembering that this is coming from upon high. This is coming from one who is high in wisdom, that one who is high in station and high in sacrifice. His position in the world and the cosmology of our faith is that Lord Woden is as detailed, or as perhaps maybe grounded and oriented in simple transactional ideas between humans as he is with perhaps tapping into the root of the cosmos. It's such a kind of crazy thing that happens as the poem starts to grow and become more. And I say that because there's speculation that the poem might be an amalgamation of groups of poems. And so it's generally seen as sectionalized. And whether these sections are right or wrong, it does help with our understanding of the poems and why they have such kind of what would seem like a jarring tempo. It's because these parts are unique unto themselves and may have either amalgamated over time and were presented when they were written down in the Codex Regius, or that they might have been brought together there. But it's not, there's no really way of knowing. And so we have to look at these sections with a kind of, I wouldn't say a minuteness, but it helps to framework our stepping forward as we do this, because this is a very big poem. It covers a lot of ground, and it also makes marks towards things that it never made marks before. So, especially speaking towards like the later half in the lay of Lodfafnir, that is where, or Lodfafnir is where it it gets interesting. Like why all of a sudden? And so there's a cool kind of understanding that perhaps these poems were separate and eventually kind of melded together. And that was kind of another thing I spoke a lot about during the Voluspa, is that the skalds were getting good and they were able to transmit this poem orally so that it could be written down. And they did it most likely. And I'm a believer that they started combining them before it was written down. And that's what allowed us to get the entirety of the picture. And I think that a lot of that may be, and well, it's in my belief that it was Lord Woden's will that led that to happen. Now, I'm not saying that the Hávamál is, these are, it's interesting because these are the words of Lord Woden, but it's an interesting poem in our faith because it is the wisdom of him, but it is not edict down to one singular person. As Alcerigo kind of jokes sometimes and says, Lord Woden didn't come down and say, write this, or stone tablets or what have you. That's a very man-made religious idea. For us, it's the influence of the holy divine as they weave and drip and ripple the water of the well of earth. They begin to influence things outside of just things that we might consider like storms for Thor. It's much more than that. It's much deeper than that. And they have a vested interest in doing these things. And I think that Lord Woden tailored this motion towards amalgamating these wisdoms, and it became exactly what it needed to be at the behest of Lord Woden. But we have many translations, and we don't ever postulate that it is the singular truth, and don't pay attention to all these translations. In actuality, the Asatru Folk Assembly takes a broad view of the ideas that it's best to look at all the variations to understand why translations are the way they are, why Hollander wants to use poetics and try to revitalize Anglo-Saxon poetic culture, or why Thorpe liked to use almost literal translations, but his spelling was very odd. It's a tapestry. And so it branches off into many different directions. So the way I like to tell people is that you could look at this in 5 or 4 sections. I tend to do it in 4, and that's kind of how me and Alcerigo, they were talking about how to organize this and try to make it. We're shooting for the framework of 4, but it might take more. Who knows? But the best way I've always looked at it is there is the councils, which is the edicts of men and how they should act. There is like the proverbials or proverbs, and then there is the lay of Fafnir, the lay of Lode Fafnir. Now that when you start seeing the name Lode Fafnir, you're in the middle of the poem. And so then after that comes the rune poem and the magic charms, and they're kind of the Runatau is, as it's been listed, is kind of together. So the 4 parts is where I would say is the councils, the proverbs, the lay of Lode Fafnir, and then the runic magic or the runic charm section. And that would be a great way for you to simplify it in order to digest it. There are other ways you can look at this, and you could kind of pick them apart in that way, but I'm going for what's easiest for everyone.
What stanza are we running to tonight?
That is an interesting question, Alcerigo.
Why?
I mean, I wanted to run to 79 because that's where I consider the guest councils to kind of end, okay, and or the counseling of men. But is it lofty? At any moment, you could just simply say, we'll stop here and continue on.
Fair
And
enough,
I'll make
and we
sure
might do that. That number sounds like a lot when compared to the Voluspa, but something to consider is there's a lot more obscurity in the Voluspa. There's a lot more poetic language
Direct.
and need to understand deeper things. One of the cool things about the Hávamál is it is very accessible. It's very straightforward, and I think that's going to be, it. There is certainly benefit in delving into the deeper imagery of some of the other poems, but there's also a very tangible usefulness of the Hávamál that I think will be a good and useful thing to our listeners and folks who are watching this.
Yeah, I think the directness of it is something that might help us get through more content. But questions and things are always a wild card. So, I mean, as long as it takes, is how long we can keep doing this. And you just give the all right, let's stop here, and we'll just keep formulating from there.
All right, so I'm gonna do the opposite of that. Let's start here and go ahead and take us through stanza 1, and I think we can fill in any details and any stuff, but I think we're ready to jump right in.
Okay. Yeah, and it's speaking just briefly about translations. We were talking earlier about I have a translation from Sophist Boog, and but the Bellows translation has a perfect balance of poetics with directness. So I think that's going to help us as well, and it's very relatable. Hollander and Thorpe have a tendency to get very poetic and utilizing usage and spelling and words that might throw people off. So if anyone was ever wondering why we chose Bellows, that's predominantly why. So let me put my Boog translation away, though I might reference it later. In the first stanza, what we have truly is an immediate sense that a guest, much like in the Voluspa, when the poet is trying to calm the crowd down and let them know that a poem is about to be, the recitation of a poem is about to be laid out before everyone, and this kind of becomes part of the poem. In this case, it's almost like the entirety of this starts out with what is called the gestathouter. The gestathouter is the rules or the etiquettes or the guidelines of the guest. And it kind of also then begins the reciprocal relationship with the host as well. But you are the guest, and it starts with you, the listener, being at the door of a hall or of a home or of a mead hall, if you will, or it can apply to very much anywhere. And but try to place yourself as coming to this hall. The door is closed, and the immediate wisdoms of the High One are starting to be laid down. So within the gates, ere a man shall go, full warily let him watch, full long let him look about him, for little he knows where a foe may lurk and sit in the seats within. So right out the gate, it's this is an exaltation of caution, that no one knows what enemy might be presented. And in contextually to the time, this had a lot of power. You might have made an enemy at the Althingr many months ago, and now you're going into a hall and you don't know who's your enemy and who's your ally and what is expected of you, or you only have a loose guideline, but you're not quite sure. The best way that it's so funny. I remember a saying from General Mattis who said, "Be polite, be courteous, but have a plan to kill everyone in the room." It's a kind of a Marine Corps axiom of or nugget of truth that he kind of blurbed out, and it made me think of this stanza when he said it. Was, you just never know, so have contingency plans, always be weary, but also be polite, be nice, and follow the rules.
So one thing that I love about this, and it starts just out the gate with it. Asatru is a religion that is inseparable from lifestyle. It's not a religious practice that you do when you're at the Hof or a specific way that you perform Lotar. It's a way of thinking, way of seeing the world, way of being. And so a lot of it, especially that you'll find in the Hávamál, is infinitely practical on high spiritual occasions and the most mundane, like you're walking into a bar, you're walking into the store. Not even joking, you find yourself in the men's room. Like, keep your head on a swivel. Don't let folks behind you that you don't know who's behind you. Be aware of your surroundings. I've heard it referred to often as situational awareness. When you enter a new environment, or when you re-enter a familiar environment, be aware, pick up on little things, spend more time ingesting information up front than you do just vomiting forth whatever you think you have to say. Take in the scene, read the room, as it were. And that goes for action, it goes for speech. Be aware. One of the things I learned when I was bouncing is, we'd get done bouncing and we'd have a rowdy night where crazy stuff would go on. And it was really, big club/bar. It was 1,000-person capacity in Anchorage. So stuff would get squirrely, and then we'd go out to eat afterwards. The guy who taught me everything I knew about that particular industry and a lot about situational awareness was one of the things that he taught me is, you go into a restaurant, don't sit with your back to the door. Sit to where you can see what's coming at you, to where you're aware of what's going on, because you never know if we could have had an interaction or thrown somebody out that pops through that door. You're not paying attention. You're drinking your milkshake or eating your eggs, and somebody comes up behind you. So that's I think that's really valuable, the situational awareness.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, again, what you made mention of is not just lifestyle. It becomes multiple lifestyles of the folk altogether, and that develops into a culture. And so we have this culture, and when we talk about, like, Asatru is a warrior religion, it's because there is a heavy emphasis in our culture towards preparedness, towards masculine tendencies of defense, and because knowing that the world is not always a safe place, that the gods never intended for us to, from the get-go, to be in a safe and cushy garden or safe space. We from the onset, we're let out to be tested, and that requires us and hones us in our culture towards the idea. And that's why it just right out the gate, he's talking about it. Stay frosty. Like, as soon as you walk into a place, the tone though changes, and this is not, I think, intended. It's just something that I, as a storyteller, have always kind of is not so much. Generally, this is the next stanza is seen as the guest, and it has a good stance, but I've always taken it as a storyteller, that the storyteller is standing there and he sees a guest come through the door. And the first thing that he says is, in essence, is hail the king, hail the host, hail the person who's opening his hall to guests. And he announces a guest. So the line "Hail to the giver" is kind of giving towards the king or towards the jarl or towards the lord or the owner of the household. A guest has come, and so I've always kind of saw that quite like in my head as a playing out of a storyteller or a skald, kind of taking this moment to perhaps even physically utilize a guest coming in as the embarking part of the story to lay about these maxims of guest friendliness. But that's the second stanza. Hail to the giver, a guest has come. Where shall a stranger sit? And it says, like, where I cannot see where a stranger sits is what is kind of referred to in the Old Norse. And it says, swift shall he be who with swords shall try the proof of his might to make. And this is an interesting one too, because the referencing of swords in relation to perhaps other translations, the idea of his raiments or his equipment or gear or things, it's kind of seen as like a person who is trying his luck at travel, at perhaps coming into the hall. It's not quite specified. I've always taken it as the dangers of travel. So it's like this person has come, they're wearing adornments of protection and clothing of and coats and things because they've just dared to, travel the long road to get here. And so I've always taken this, that with much haste, with all of his gear and accoutrements, has come to make proof or try his luck or his boon, to be here, to meet with us, to partake in the party or the gathering. So this second stanza is a little confusing. It's kind of clear in the beginning, but at the end, you'll notice a lot of the translations kind of place like the sword or sitting by the fire, but it always kind of boils down to they've tested their luck to come across the roads so far and in danger to be here with us is kind of the overall meaning of this second stanza. So we have, the hail to the Lord, the guest has come. Where shall he sit? I cannot see a spot for him. And he has come across the roads and bore much to be here in this gathering and try his luck or weave the luck that we have together here. He needs a fire, or fire he needs, Fire he needs, stanza 3. Fire he needs, who with frozen knees has come from the cold without. Food and clothes must the fairer have. The man from the mountains come. So it's interesting and specific. I think Bellows is attempting poetics with a great sense of making it adaptable to English, but not looking at perhaps say Old English or a specific time of poetic form. But what we end up finding is that here is the fire is warm and outside is cold, and the reference to the knees being cold is more along the lines of a horse rider. If you're riding a horse and you come in, that's one of it's like being on a motorcycle and getting your hands frozen. It's just something that and colloquially, I think that's what he's alluding to is his knees are cold because he's been riding on a horse. The fire he needs, who with frozen knees. I always an interesting. But again, I digress. The usage of this stanza again is re-emphasizing that the host is providing key elements, and this one, of course, being the fire. And the man from the mountain, I think, is just really more or less a person of the far outreaches. Someone has come from far away to be here. From the fjall, he comes, and that's kind of a usage word of mountains or a mountain. But he needs this place, and this is provided. And then in stanza 4, water and towels and welcoming speech should he find who comes to the feast. If renown he would get, and again be, let me see, greeted wisely, and well must he act. So this is where again they're laying that dichotomy of guest to host, the water and towels. I remember it was quite common the first time ever at a fellow Asatru's house that a drink was offered. Water generally was the drink. Would you like a glass of water? Would you like anything to drink? That was so common, and I think it's very common in our culture now because there is no dissecting between Old Norse Germanics and modern day American Germanics. The idea was, yeah, do you need a drink? Anything, and then towels, of course, was wiping your hands, wiping your face, or dealing with any sort of elemental issues. And this was kind of the time in which the guests might pull out their comb and recorrect themselves from the ride. And it's the reference to food and clothes. Food and clothes must the farer have is basically the traveler is dressed. The traveler is bedecked in garb for the travel and is starting to recorrect, readjust, perhaps taking the coat off or taking the cloak or what have you, the outer jackets. And it kind of references settling in, but the other part of this is welcoming speech and acting wisely, I think, is the next part. Having someone recognize you when you come in, having someone note that you're new or that you're in the right place and you're welcome. It was so important. And I think that generally a lot of that was a cultural responsibility of the women in the hall. The women of the folk oftentimes would take these moments to, oh, you're new. Hi, welcome. And it ladies have always been kind of bearers of the olive branch, if you will, or the weavers of frith. They were there with goodly speech to welcome the person and to let them know what they needed to know. You need to put your things there. You need to come over here if you want a hot drink, and you want to sit down over here. And welcome to the hall, or welcome to our home. It was so clear cut, but they're painting a cultural like constitution that was alive then and is still, well, sometimes, but I think in Asatru itself is still very much alive.
Yeah, it's these verses are really important to reinforce that hospitality is one of our noble virtues. It's a very important element of Asatru, and so is reputation. And that's one of the things this also points out. We've all heard the expression, you don't get a second chance at a first impression. First impressions mean so much, and there are many ways that Asatru goes in the face of things that are in vogue in the current wolf age that we find ourselves in. We're all about judging. Like, don't be obnoxious and overly judge. But as the very first line of the Hávamál that we read talks about, you need to judge your surroundings. You need to judge people. And you judge very often by what you see. You judge with your eyes first. That goes to some of the discussion in the chat room about obesity, and we'll talk about that later. But yes, your physical, how you carry yourself, your physical state of being says a lot about your character, and it puts out a lot of intangibles that communicate to us non-verbally things. But it also talks about how, if you want renown and if you want to be invited again, you need to know how to act right. So you need to be conscious that at any occasion, you could be making the very first impression on somebody, and your future hospitality that you are in line to receive is dependent upon the impression you make with the host and the other people in the room with you. This modern idea of I don't care what other people thinks, that's completely antithetical to Asatru. You should absolutely care what everyone thinks. You should care, even if you hate them, you should care that what your foe thinks. You should want your foe to be intimidated by you. If your foe is much more powerful than you, then you should want your foe not to notice you. But more importantly, to the context here, you should want people to think highly of you, to think that you're come from good stock, that you have wisdom, that you have capability of handling yourself. You should absolutely care how you present yourself, how other people see you. And that was paramount to our ancestors and should be to us today.
Yeah, that polarization between the guest and the host and the value that they have. The guest should judge those around him when he goes into the hall because he doesn't know what he's facing. And the host, too, has the right to judge the guest as they come in by what they, how they are, how they act, and that renown. And I like the fact that the usage of the word renown in reference to the ability to gain popularity, or not even popularity, but just perhaps a power of presence that can grow. It's they're erring towards the positive. That's the desire that's wanted. But the value of judging is immediately nullified if we all think, oh, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't do this, don't do that. It softens the value of anyone's opinion anyways, including your own. So you sacrifice or mute other people's opinions to kind of shield yourself, but you also devalue your own opinion.
And here's the thing, reality is what matters. This feel good, don't offend each other silliness isn't. You absolutely should judge a book by its cover. We all do that. That shouldn't be the end of your judgment, but it certainly should be the beginning of your judgment.
Right.
And that's a survival skill on anything. You assess with your eyes first. Don't be overconfident with that. There's certainly more to the story, but that's absolutely where we should all start. And whether we admit it or not, it's the place where we all instinctively do start.
Well, so we move into the adjustment of the clothes, the giving of food and of drink or our food and like clothing or a warm blanket or a place to sit is given out. But they're starting to leak in the idea that there's wisdom that must be had in the words that you use and the people that you encounter. And so in stanza 5, wits must he have who wanders wide, but all is easy at home. At the witless man, the wise shall wink when among such men he sits. So this usage of the word, obviously the first 2 lines are pretty straightforward. You got to be smart if you travel. You're going to learn. There's a steep learning curve in traveling. And it is safe to stay at home, but you gain nothing from it. You gain no wit. You gain no allegiance. You gain no knowledge. If you don't ever put yourself out there on the road, you end up becoming a coal chewer, as they called it. A child that stayed at home was oftentimes called a coal chewer because they were, staying near the fire of their mother and father's hall. And it was kind of a derogatory term. And so, again, culturally, I think it's important that we don't have this concept that you need to leave for the sake and kind of become an atomized unit. But it's that you're going out into the world and gaining wits allows you to come back to your people, make your parents proud, make your people understand that you've learned so much. So, you have to have wits when you go out there into the world, because it is easy at home. But again, if you stay at home, you become this witless man. And the wise shall wink is translated as oftentimes will become a laughing stock, or is laughed at. So I find it interesting that Bellows used that word in specific. What's that?
I got an anecdote. So
yeah,
I'm just going to throw it out there. I might have been petty, but I think it was a nice thing to do for one of the people there. Anyways, it is what it is. I went to wasn't really an Asatru event per se, but it was a book signing for a friend of mine who had written a book related to Asatru. And so I went to be supportive, and some Asatru are and some others who were inclined to attend this went to a dinner afterwards. And there was this teenage boy who was there. And he was very uncomfortable. His mother was there with a stepdad. I think it was a guy she was dating. I'm not sure, but he was very rude and boorish and a very big embarrassment to this young man, because this guy was with his mom, and it was kind of a scene. You could tell he was very embarrassed. Well, this guy couldn't, the stepdad / dude the mom was seeing was so full of himself, and he couldn't stop with how great he is and what a genius he was and all this stuff. And we sat and we listened. And again, he was making a fool out of himself. So we all kind of looked at each other, and, I don't think that we wink as much in this context, because, that would not be very hetero of us per se. So we would look at each other and kind of make a face. And that's the point that's being made here. When we looked at this kid, and, he saw where he was at and he was uncomfortable. So something that another gentleman who was there with me did was we started conversationally speaking the lyrics to Whitney Houston's I Believe the Children Are Our Future. We would conversationally speak it back and forth to each other in response to this guy. And he had no idea, which made it awesome. So, I believe the children are our future. Teach them well. Let them show the way. Show them all the beauty that they possess inside. Yeah, give them a sense of pride. And
was he responding to this?
Well, yeah, because we were looking at the kid, and the kid knew exactly what was going on, and his face lit up, and he was able to hold his head high and have a good night. And that was kind of why we did it. It wasn't
that was so the winking joke.
Hard, although that was a side point. It was more to help this kid know that he wasn't the only one. But I digress.
No, that's great, because it does kind of, I think what you're capturing is Bellows and what he was trying to insinuate, because times have changed in the way that we think of like a wink. But generally, the idea, of course, was like you're in the joke, right? Get a load of this guy. I think about the old cartoons, like where they're like breaking the fourth wall and they're winking at the audience and saying, what a maroon. That's kind of if you don't heed the advice, if you are the improper guest that's full of himself, other people around the table are going to muster their their wits against you.
Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy.
And you know what? So this is another, again, digression. We may not get all the way to 79 on this, right? But it's good. I love talking about this, and we could do 100 episodes on this. So much of many pieces of our lore, and we talked about this when Brandy and I discussed Beowulf, but hall culture was so essential because it's a microcosm of our society, and it transcends time and place. This was, me and a group of 10 people in 2019 at a Mexican restaurant. So it's really transcends location. Social dynamics, they change a little bit here and there, but there's a lot of truths that build them up that is essential to Asatru, because fundamentally, and the Hávamál does this really well, it illustrates the need for a strong individual, but also the context of that individual in his community, because both of those are essential. And it's very easy to get unbalanced, but Asatru is not all about the individual in your own personal little journey. It's about you becoming the best version of yourself you can be, but it's about how you interface with your community because of that. And not only, you don't want to look like a fool when you go to a dinner party, but we all bond and become stronger as a group by noting that you are being a fool, and by sharing and pointing that out. It's a very real social dynamic amongst people, is bonding through, making fun of somebody who shows themselves to be pompous or full of themselves or behave badly socially. And so that's certainly something to be extremely aware of as well.
Well, and you mentioned mead culture. I wanted to, again, you were the one that had kind of led me towards this book, The Mead Hall, and I think it's really important that it's mentioned because of what you just said about the mead of hall culture, and its importance amongst all the branches of Teutonic Aryans, whether they were Germans or Anglos or Nords, or even in the East. It was you can still see it in a lot of the descriptions and the writings and things that they have mentioned, and lasting even well into Christian period, if you will. Let me see, because I know that was good. I'm sorry, the Whitney Houston thing killed me. Let's see. So yeah, we're going back and we're on stanza 6 now. And we go here with a man shall not boast of his keenness of mind, but keep it close to his breast. To the silent and wise does ill come seldom, when he goes as a guest to a house. For a faster friend one never finds than wisdom tried and true. So right here, I mean, this is I love this translation because it's not about translating Old Norse and its context, as it is more so giving the essence of the truth of this stanza to people. You have to make it digestible, and you have to make the wisdom's useless if it's so archaic that you can't quite grasp what's going on. And so this one is really good. Don't be over boastful, just like you said, with the guest kind of pomping and preening. There is a level of confidence is good, but when you're in a multiple group exchange, sometimes you have to have that wisdom to know, confidence to know who you are, but the wisdom enough to know that you should sit and listen to the others, kind of figure out where they are at, judge them, what they're presenting, how they're talking, and what they're doing. It gives you a better sense, and it's not limiting yourself as it is, not revealing everything you need to reveal. You might have a great keenness of mind about certain things, but you might not about other things. And so it's good, perhaps an opportunity of your speciality will show up, and then a chance where maybe you have a gap, someone else will bridge it, and then you might seek an alliance with that person, or build a friendship with that person, or what have you. So this stanza is talking about the idea that you don't need to go out, spill your guts. You don't need to go out and tell everyone either naively or overly confident, braggishly so, but in a foolish sense. And it's from there. When you go to someone's house, the wisdom that you learn, and I think that's what really ultimately the end is what it's talking about, is the wisdom that you gain as you travel. This is a reiteration of it. You should know, if you're a well-traveled person, you don't let all of the words fly. Sit, relax, enjoy each other's company, slowly begin to learn who people are, learn their words, learn where they stand, make your assessments of them, and allow them to have a controlled assessment. And I think that's another big thing about the Hávamál at this point, is you are, as the guest, are controlling the assessment of how people judge you. There are things that people will judge you that you have no control over, but there are other things that you have very much. So it's not a victim mindset at all. It's the exact opposite. You have control of how people assess you, and it's important for you to be mindful of that control. And that goes all the way from drinking too much to speaking too much to being inappropriate in any way, shape, or form. It's so good. It's like a hammer down right in the first 10 stanzas. The knowing guest who goes to the feast in silent attention sits, with ears he hears, with eyes he watches. Thus wary are wise men all. And again, that just kind of reemphasized what I just said, is there is no better wisdom than patience. There's no better wisdom than to have the ability to kind of sit back, control what you can control, which is yourself, and assess what other people are doing. Some people are going to turn the faucet on and let it all out, and you can know that about that person. And other people might shy off or hide even, or linger in the shadows and corners of the hall. You begin to see things, and this, I love the painting of this is that it's that cultural tag is, you're in the thick of it right now. We're in the hall and we're weaving weird together, and you might see a tapestry of people, but you should be the person that sits back, listens, and learns. You don't have to scorn anything. There's actually a stanza about that when we talk about the silent scorners, the ones that kind of are cynics and venomous in their minds, but we'll get to that. In stanza 8, happy the one who wins for himself favor and praises fair. Less safe by far is the wisdom found that is hid in another's heart. Actually, we'll start right now about silent cynicism. But there's more emphasis later. If you win your renowned fairly by your kindness, your goodliness of speech, your ability to not being an overbearing, boil on the face of all of this, and you end up being quite pleasant, you will build fair renown, and it's given to you fairly. It's given to you based off of how you control and measure out who you are. You're not necessarily having to air everything deeply about yourself, but it's also good to, act good, act nice. And the reason for this is that you never know. The assessments and judgments of others can change based off of your either overly controlling and just kind of shutting down or hiding, or your overtness of just letting it all out. People are listening to you, and you never know what you might say that causes an offense. And it's best to not dive into topics and be so brash to the point that you're making unnecessary enemies. And that's a less safe by far is the wisdom found that is hid in another's heart. And that, I think, is kind of what the illusion of that, or alluding to that, is if somebody has wisdom, they're keeping quiet and they're listening to you, and you're going off and saying something about someone, and then it turns out they're a family member and you just didn't know. And that they have learned, and you have let the cat out of the bag, if you will.
So this is as good a time as any to just make the point of reputation as currency. I've already said that it matters a ton what other people think of you. The notion that I don't care what other people think about me, only God can judge me or whatever. No, first, the gods certainly can judge you and do, but your peers judge you. We judge each other. To pretend that we don't is deluding yourself, and it's not to your benefit. Reputation matters. And when I say that, I don't just mean popularity, but in general, there's all kind of reputation preceding you that helps. And if you've built a good reputation, a strong reputation, then that's an armor and a defense against, when you fall short in these things. If you do make a faux pas, or you slip up, or you're not perfect on it, if you've won renown for yourself and other people around, when the gossip happens behind your back, like, no, I know that dude, he's that's the wrong dude to mess with, or no, I know that guy, he's the nicest guy I've ever known, you just caught him at a bad time. Reputation will smooth over a lot of things. And again, it's not just popularity in the sense that people like you or you're cool. It's also known traits that you have or that you don't have. It's a history of behavior and a history of action. When you come into a new place, you have zero of that. So that's, again, this is a time to reiterate that. This is a small fraction of that being discussed here a bit.
Well, and so we move to stanza number 9. And again, I think we can roll through these some pretty fast, because they are, again, re-emphasizing the points. But happy is the man who has, while he lives, wisdom and praise as well. For evil counsel a man full oft has from another's heart. So we had kind of made mention of the usage of like 2 lines. And so if you're looking at these stanzas as sections of 4, the first 2 lines, happy is the man who has, while he lives, wisdom and praise as well. That is, again, re-emphasizing that one can find a great amount of renown or peace or alliance or frith or happiness or just a general good sense within your community if you are a balance of good manners and reservation and thoughtfulness. I think that's a big thing. Thinking before you speak, speaking to others with a sense of civility is so important that it cannot stop you from gaining gravity within the community. But the second part, for evil counsel a man full oft has from another's heart, is a warning, a boding sense that oftentimes others do not have your best intentions at heart. this could be seen as a warning towards, I mean, clearly, you know, bad, evil, and maliciousness is out there. It could also be just kind of, again, is you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know who you're dealing with. And you and your closest kinfolk are the ones that have perhaps your best interests at heart. You should proceed in the world with caution. I think many people have felt this way when they get betrayed by someone who kind of patronizes them or leads them into a situation and then suddenly kind of pulls the rug out from under someone. That kind of level of falsity, it's somebody should not be able to call you brother so easily. That's a big problem, I think, culturally that we have right now because of our desperation to unite and get together and start to kind of reignite the faith and build community and do all of these things. But sometimes it's too loose. People will say, "Hey, brother," and it's like, I don't know you that well. And perhaps, you know, we should get to know each other better before we start, you know, saying such things. I had a very similar incident happen for myself with you know, a former member who called me his brother and spoke very loosely of his of affiliations with me. And then we're about to embark on something that was really important for everyone. I was kind of left holding the bag. And it's like, that's not how you treat someone you would call your brother. So, you know, you should, your wisdom in kind of in this situation is, again, I think he's alluding to, you know, your ability to keep silence, keep your wits moving forward. And you never know what other people are constitute. And I would say not just evil, but even cowardice can plague people, and you never quite know. So you should move things slowly and build friendships over long periods of time. Let's see. So in
I think it's worth throwing in, you know, Ronald Reagan's advice: trust but verify. Like, there's a social thing if people are trying to tell you things like that. Like, okay, for example, Svan's example of people calling you brother. That's nice. It is a nice gesture. It is a nice thing. But take that, smile, appreciate it, nod, whatever you're going to do, but file it away as something to be tested. When I say tested, to watch for situations where that's put to the test. I don't mean to intentionally put that to the test. I think that's a misuse of, it's a bad repaying of a kindness. But don't take things at face value, think on them, and run them through the filter of your wisdom. That's why it talks about, you know, that wisdom being so valuable, is it gives you a context and a frame of reference rather than having to just trust what people tell you, because often there's duplicity there.
For those that don't know, I'm getting back from a very long flu, which was kind of ridiculous. But I was going to read this stanza, and I was wondering, Alistair, if you could take kind of an insight on it so that I could run and take care of my situation as far as getting some tissues and things. I didn't want to do that on screen, but I also wanted to grab a thing of cough drops as well. Stanza 10. And this one is, I think, one that's quoted often. I think it deserves to be quoted often. And I definitely think it holds a presence of wisdom that's broader than just simply its words.
Hey, Svan,
Yeah.
I got this. When your cartoon character leaves and your face returns, I will hand it off to you, but I got it from here.
Okay, I'll be right
back.
back.
You're good. No worries. Stanza 10. A better burden may no man bear for wanderings wide than wisdom. It is better than wealth on unknown ways, and in grief, a refuge it gives. Again, that is building on what's been said 4 times or so far. Wisdom is, and this is true in life in general, and I think it's very relevant when we talk about advice to the traveler. Wealth can come and go. Wealth can be stolen. Your currency may not work in that part of the world. It's situational. Other tools are situational. Wisdom isn't. Wisdom can be applied in any different situation. Wisdom stays with you. You have wisdom, and you don't lose it unless very unforeseen things happen, brain damage, or that's one of the reasons that dementia in old age is such a terrible thing, because it robs you of experience. But yeah, the experience that you have that goes with you, that can provide you internal counsel rather than having to rely on the things that others say. That guiding light of things that you know to be true through experience and through well-gained wisdom is essential and extremely valuable. Stanza 11 reads, "A better burden may no man bear for wanderings wide than wisdom. Worse food for the journey he brings not afield than an overdrinking of ale." Looks like Svan has returned, but I think this and the following stanza, it's very important to balance it with balance it within the context of the lore. The idea here is a person who is traveling outside of an environment that they know. And I think this is wisdom that all of us know fundamentally, but it's worth reiterating. Don't get drunk in company that you don't know, where you don't know where you're at, especially if you're not there with people. If you have somebody to help look after you, that's one thing, but if you become drunk, you become a burden to whoever's there. So make sure they're game to watch your back if that's the case, because you make yourself less capable of having the situational awareness we've talked about this whole time. And this is something that I think is valuable to mention, because it is a very common thing for many of us to do, to get a little liquid courage in you. You go someplace, you have a social anxiety, you're not comfortable, you don't know what to do. In order to make yourself more comfortable, you have a few drinks. There is a certain amount of wisdom in that. It does that. The same mechanism it uses to lower your inhibitions to approach people or to be social is the exact same mechanism that it makes you less capable of being aware of your surroundings. So keep those things in mind. There's plenty of context in our lore where drinking is appropriate amongst friends, amongst family, in a safe place to where you're around people that you have trust with. Drinking ritually, even drinking socially in a place where you have people to look after you and be comfortable. But we've seen this a lot, and I mean, this is very valuable for men, but I'll say this specifically for ladies. And I've seen this having worked in the bar industry lots and lots of times, but the girls will go out together and say they're going to watch somebody. They'll let their friend get trashed, and then they'll find a guy they're talking to and run off. And next thing you know, this woman's there by herself and doesn't have her full wits with her. And it's a very dangerous situation. So, yeah, that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And it's just as valuable in 2024 as it was in 924.
Well, a better burden no man bears than his wisdom, but a heavy burden is the over drinking, and I think that goes to say that it kind of alluding back to the open with words, open with emotions, open with too much, to the point where you become your merit drops because you kind of exude too much. And there's another kind of point that is exuded throughout the Hávamál is wisdom through experience, not edicts or commandments without any sense of knowing. There is an entirety of the poem exudes that the wisdom that's being given is given either because it's been witnessed or experienced over and over and over again. So it's never kind of, it's not two-dimensional if you think about it. And just as you applied it in that sense, is because, again, from experience, each one of these stanzas, I think, kind of has that key to, have you experienced this before? Or, again, with the Hávamál, I'll go back and read it and just like, oh, why did I not? If I could have just had a pop in my head.
Before we hit stanza 12, we have a monetized question from Michael Cosgrove at $20. Thank you so much, Michael. We appreciate that. Does the AFA have a set doctrine/translation of reading materials for the folk? And if not, could we possibly will this into existence? Sort of and sort of. As far as set translation, we've talked about that a little bit. There are lots of good translations. There's lots of ones that we would recommend. I don't think we have one that we are standardized on. And one of the reasons is, a big factor is public domain or not, as far as our ability to reprint it and reuse it and people's accessibility to it. So we wouldn't want to prioritize something that's easier to use in a public domain, but less accurate or less spiritually valuable. There's strengths and benefits to lots of the different translations, and we may have a few that we shy away from, but that would be different depending on every piece of literature. The problem is there's not an exact corpus of literature that's canon versus literature that's not. As far as recommended readings and recommended literature as part of our lore, we already have a good list on that, and I would say get with Witan Brandy on that, and she can get you squared away with that reading list. Yes, we'd like to formalize that a little bit more on specific things that we endorse as being very, very useful for study. But yeah, that's a good suggestion. The best, I would say, to get a reading list of the lore that we think is essential or certainly very valuable. I think Brandy's got that list, but I know that we've been working on that behind the scenes. And with that, Svan, could you take us through stanza 12?
Yes. Less good there lies than most believe in ale for mortal men. For the more he drinks, the less does man of his mind the mastery hold. So, yeah, this is oftentimes I've heard it is, good it is thought, but good it is not, ale or mead for the sons of men. Again, there's this emphasis on, it's not about, I would say it's not about abstinence as it is about measurement and control of oneself, or what one divulges, and that mead has a tendency to make that not as an easy task for a wise person who travels. But you emphasized it as well. It's about who you trust. Drinking around the folk you trust often leads towards and being in a home or what have you. It's still not good to overdrink to the point of, ashamedness towards your family members, that could cause a whole nother bucket of problems. But the context, I think, here too is again, you're around people who perhaps you don't know, and you're in an environment that you might not fully understand or can't fully assess. So it's best that you don't imbibe in a liquid that's going to make it harder for you to do all of those things.
And there's irresponsibility of just you having too much or you overdoing it, but there's also, and this cuts both ways depending on who you are and what your purposes are, but inflicting alcohol on someone is a powerful tool. It's a tool to get their defenses down. It's a tool that makes them easier to take advantage of. It's a tool that makes them easier for you to get honesty from, and complete honesty or oversharing may not be what you want to do. So be wise that when you're out in a strange place with strange people, maybe they're consistently trying to get you to take shots with them, is so that you are more susceptible to wherever they want to go with you. Be that to divulge information that you wouldn't otherwise, be that to put you in a situation you don't want to be in, be that to take advantage of you, sexually or otherwise. Again, it's a whole lot about context.
This next one always throws people off, and I feel that the summation or perhaps the theory that is best, I'll share it, but it always throws people off because over beer the bird of forgetfulness broods. That oftentimes translated to as the heron of forgetfulness, or the heron of oblivion. I've seen that translation too. That was pretty crazy. But what they're speaking of is most likely a context towards a drinking device that was utilized in the halls at the time. Generally, there was a larger place where the mead or the beer or the ale was kept, and it had to be transferred from that large vessel into smaller vessels, and then oftentimes from that smaller vessel into a cup. Our ancestors did, a lot. The horns are very culturally connected to us now, but our ancestors did use, chalices and goblets and mead cups and mead bowls and things like that. But they would transfer that mead from that vessel, and oftentimes what it would be is the handle would be carved like a bird, or the handle would be carved like a heron. And so this is a poetic reference to the ladles of these meads just flying out over the tables where ladies or hosts or, folk that were kind of serving and dispensing the mead that was brewed, they would do it with these ladles that had bird heads on the ends. And they were usually shaped that way to hang in the vessel. So you would see all of these little kind of birds on the edge of the cauldron or the edge of the barrel. And then they would lift it up and they would ladle everything out. And it was important to kind of understand the reference of this is like the bird, the herons of forgetfulness is just, again, a poetic kenning saying, these it's kind of like saying like the taps were hit, or the beer was flowing. Again, is that this reference, but it's ominous because it's flying over the whole host of the crowd, and with every ladle you get, it steals your mind. And again, it's referencing specifically to the heron because of that shape in its preferred sense for the perhaps even just specifically in when this was being written down as a poem, the scalds may have been referencing just a particular place not across the board. Like you could go to Sweden, or you could go to Norway, or you could go to Iceland, and there would always be this kind of heron ladle. But it was clearly being mentioned in this referencing that the bird of forgetfulness is flying over. And with heron feathers, fettered I lay in Gunnlod's house was held. So this is an interesting part too, because there's a kenning in the first part, and then they're alluding to another story, and the story of the mead of poetry gained by Lord Vodin and his attainment through boring into Sutungur's mountain and coming in and seeing Gunnlod there and wooing her and drinking the mead of poetry, the blood of Kvasir. But it wasn't the only thing he probably drank while he was there. It was the ultimate goal, was to gain that power. And that, of course, power is very allegoric for much more cosmic things. But in this sense of the story, he imbibes in the mead and is caught in the moment. And instead of just simply taking the blood of Kvasir, he stops and he talks to Gunnlod. Gunnlod, of course, her name means battle song. And, from their union, if you will, poetry is born. And there's a lot of greatness in that story. But the overall sense is that, he could have easily just came in and got what he needed done, but he didn't. He stayed, and he was fettered in this moment, and got kind of connected and almost killed, because the story that they're referencing is that, again, Suttung comes into the mountain and he's like, oh, gotta go, and he turns into an eagle and he flies up through the center of the mountain, and Suttung wastes no time and goes right after him and changes shape as well, and then a wild chase scene starts. So again, he's like, I had a mission and I got waylaid from the mission because of the heron in the mountain that made me stop and focus on Gunnlod all of a sudden, and focus on the moment there when I should have just grabbed what I needed and left.
And yeah, it's worth throwing this in here now as well. I mentioned this when we did our study of the Voluspa. These stories aren't told chronologically. And when getting involved in the study of our lore, for anybody who's new, or as a reminder to folks that may be partway through that journey, there's not a clean stopping point, or a starting point rather. So that said, these frequently stories from other parts of our lore are alluded to in the telling of these stories. Don't fret. We will get to those other stories. Svan and I are committed to doing that with y'all. But yeah, you'll find when you read these things and they make references to things that you don't understand, go down the Wikipedia rabbit hole on what those different things are if you'd like. And rest assured that if you do this diligently, you will fill in those blanks over time with an increased familiarity with our lore. And it's special when you get that moment where it clicks, where all of a sudden you read through it a second time and everything makes sense, because now you're familiar and new things you didn't before. I've had that moment happen to me with a lot of different pieces of our lore. So just keep that in mind as we go through, if we hit on stories that we haven't spoke of already or that are not familiar to you.
Well, and this again is another part of this reference here that makes that kind of very, very prevalent, is the referencing to Fjalar. Drunk I was dead drunk, when with Fjalar wise I was. 'Tis the best of drinking, if back one brings his wisdom with him home. So this again makes reference to a story, and the problem is Fjallar. Fjallar is, and this is most likely in reference to drinking, referring to the dwarf in the story of the Mead of Poetry. This has a lot of strength because of the reference to Gunnlóð and is also in the same story. But it is worth noting that there are multiple Fjallars, but one of them being to the rooster that crows in Ragnarok, and that doesn't necessarily hold to why would he be drinking with a rooster. But again, I know that some people have suggested that there might not be a full understanding, but I definitely believe this is referencing to the dwarf, and I think that it's interesting that it's this drinking with the dwarf. And finding out, because a part of the investigation of the story was that Lord Woden needed to find out where Kvasir's blood went. And so it was a kind of an investigation. And that, I think, is what there is referencing, is that time in which he was looking for where Kvasir's blood went. And he was quite literally talking to one of the murderers. But the reference of that in other stories, based on if the dwarves are killed by Suttung or not, kind of again creates an inconsistency in the timeline if you're looking from a point A to point B.
So this is something I was going to bring up earlier, and I spaced it, but I'd like to bring up now. There are many occasions in life, in our lore, and recreationally or anything else, where there are intoxicants, and that can be external and chemical with different substances, with alcohol, with drugs, with a variety of things. But it can also be with ecstasy, with lust, with anger, with anything, any force that overrides your ability to make rational decisions. But and I don't know if I'm phrasing this right. Odin is a god of ecstatic fury. He's a god of, in a way, certain kinds of intoxicants. But his name implies, Wodenaz implies mastery of the woad, not one who is mastered by the woad. And the difference is very fundamental and has meant a lot to me over time. The ability to partake of ecstasy, to partake of things that put you in an ecstatic state while maintaining your will, while maintaining your mastery of yourself. And as most of us know as adults, we've had occasion to find out sometimes, in difficult or embarrassing ways, that's a fine line to walk. And I think that's a fundamental to understanding this part of the stanza, or these stanzas in this poem. Also, and I mean, again, it's extremely relevant to this day and age. There's time that you have the best night of your life out drinking with your friends, and everybody gets a little loose and has a great time that's amazing, and you can remember it for the rest of your life, and it's wonderful. But I think many of us have had the experience of you go a little bit too far and you black out, and you don't remember stuff and don't know what happened, and everything was a mess, and you're told you had a good time, but you retain none of the memory of it, and none of the lasting value of the occasion. And I think that's something we can all relate to in the latter part of this.
Yeah, 'tis the best of drinking if one brings back his wisdom with him home. The retention of your wits and your bearing, your ability to not have to wake up and not understand, or again, your wits were gone and they show up apparently right before you wake up. And that's a terrible thing. I think that for myself, in the Marine Corps, there is a drinking culture. There's a drinking culture in the U.S. military, and there's a drinking culture in the Marine Corps. And I've had experiences with this, so much so that, perhaps when I was younger, it was funny or kind of relatively no harm. But, as you grow older, you begin to realize that the value of the wisdom is far greater, and your wits are far greater than your need to imbibe or to imbibe over much to the point where you're at a loss. And I think that not only is it just a part of growing up, but it's also a point where I think if someone is having a substance abuse problem, they need to harness in on it. Not everyone does, and that's another thing is you can't. You're not trying to edict other people. You have to control yourself, and that's what a lot of this is all about. And so, taking that, if you're having these moments where you're witless when you come home, perhaps it's time to consider that maybe staying away from it, or a very small amount is.
While we're talking about alcohol, I think this is important to make note of. With a lot of things, this is a part of having your wits with you and being a master of the woad as well. When you have a bad experience, you don't get to project that upon others in your abstinence. Maybe you should not drink. Your inability to handle your liquor doesn't mean that the next man over shouldn't drink either. We don't believe in equality. It's not a thing. Everybody has their own different strengths and weaknesses. So it's very easy when somebody maybe struggles with alcoholism and has overcome it for them to be straight edge and, insist that nobody else drinks because of their experience. And that's not the case. And we need to be really careful about doing that. And, at no point are we suggesting don't drink. I think this is the first night I'm drinking Monsters tonight. I think this is the first night I haven't been drinking something alcoholic that I've done this show in quite a while, just because it's fun, not because of anything else. It's kind of the one night of the week that I drink something because I'm sitting here talking with you guys, and it's kind of a celebration for me in a way. But time got the better of me, and I couldn't stop by and grab anything today. But no part of anything we're saying is don't drink. And we're not even saying don't get a little bit buzzed with your friends, but be aware. Be aware of your circumstances and be aware whether you're around friend or foe.
Good night, Daddy.
Good night, baby. Come here. I love you too, Ups.
My Daddy.
Hi, Daddy.
Daddy.
Oh, you got to too? All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry about that.
No, I think it's really important just to kind of link on to what you're saying, and people that might not know, like a lot of people don't know that I don't drink. I stopped drinking. I was drinking quite heavily after I got out of the military, and it consistently caused problems for me. And it took a long time for me to realize that. It took me a long time to actually ingest the wisdom of the Hávamál. But it is important that, I set boundaries for myself. I only drink in communion with the gods and with my folk at Sumbul. And I am not... I was very, very clear to make sure that if people said, why is this guy bloating like 4 or 5, holding bloat 4 or 5 times a day? Man, he wants to stumble every time we meet. That's really odd. But it set a parameter that I should keep it in the sacred realm. I do miss out on being able to be open and have those moments with very close people in the church and friends of mine. And I do feel there is that sense of reservation. But again, sometimes you have to say to yourselves, like, yes, I would love to be open and happy with all of these people, but sometimes that also leads down roads I don't need to go. And so perhaps it is best I only a little bit. And that's why I did it, was to not spurn the horn, but I needed to not go down those roads. And that led towards, again, counseling and healing myself of perhaps ideas and thoughts that were plaguing me when when your defenses kind of go down and your inhibitions go down. And so it wasn't necessarily the alcohol that was the problem, was the unresolved issues. So what I was doing was inhibiting a problem because of a bigger problem. And that bigger problem needed to be,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say that bigger problem needed to be addressed with a clear and wise mind. It wasn't necessarily the alcohol, as I think it could have been almost anything that could have filled that, purpose. And it was a continuous thing. And I think I made a lot of stupid decisions and did a lot of stupid things in the military, outside of the military. But over time, it was like, no, this is just something that's becoming a caveat for a bigger problem. So I had to master that, to slay that, so that I could truly begin to address the issues I had from my past with the war and with other things, to come to peace and make, again, to seek counsel with the gods, pray to them. And I gained much wisdom from it. And I feel that is a good thing for people who might be in a similar position, but it is by no means for everyone. And it's not necessarily something I would say we're, bandwagon, or teetotaling is the word I was looking for. But I have noticed that amongst the AFA and amongst our folk, I can adhere to my oath, and I get support instead of derision. I find in our church that there are people who do like to drink. That's fine. But there are a lot of people who are very, very well disciplined. The fabric of the folk in the AFA and their ability to quietly enjoy a drink and be good and have a great time and never have to regret the morning is so vast. Like every event I've ever been to, it was very pun intended, it was very sobering in a good way.
Well, and this is something to point out. One of the most valuable things, the wisdom that this talks about traveling, certainly, but also the wisdom of knowing yourself, knowing your strength, knowing your weaknesses, and knowing what's good for you may not be the same thing that's good for others. And the inverse, what's good for others may not be the same thing that's good for you. That goes into play as well. And this is because again, this goes against the common belief of the wolf age that we're in. But in the AFA, we try, and we're all affected by wolf age thinking on, equality and such, even if we don't recognize it. So I have to frequently remind our folks to pull back from, we don't like to make big sweeping rules for everyone on these things. We want people to be responsible for their own behavior. So if a person can't handle their drinking at an AFA event, we don't ask everyone not to drink. We ask that person not to drink. So it's important to realize where your strengths and weaknesses lie. And I think that's fundamental to everything, but it comes into a really specific lens when we talk about alcohol. All right, and the next stanza is one of my favorites.
Yes, the prince, the stanza. The son of a king shall be silent and wise, and bold in battle as well. Bravely and gladly a man shall go, till the day of his death is come, or has come. I think that's a typo. Yes. This seems to be a typo. There's a couple of little typos in there. To the day of his death has come. And yeah, this is so good. One, I mean, the prince, and what they're clearly saying is the aristocratic virtues are that you should try to, raise your son to be silent and wise and listen, but also bold in battle. Not a coward, not someone who is simply a fly on the wall or kind of amassing information in order to mudsling later or what have you. No, he's quiet, he's listening, he is learning, but when it comes time, he must be, very upright, forthright, willing to place that burden of aristocracy upon. And that comes not from the nature of the child himself. It's, again, the son of a king. It's kind of alluding to, remember, the source is the king. The king should embark upon, teaching the child, making the child know that these virtues are worth so much in our society and should be. And so again, the attack on masculinity is can be kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing or an internet kind of jokes or memes or what have you, but it does really root down into some truly deep spiritual concepts of our culture. And this last part is, again, applying to that king, but again, the noble behavior is that you shouldn't go forth in your life with fear. Your death, you should be happy and bold and brave and forward until your time comes. There's no reason. And I think this is a huge thing that really captured. It was captured in, I hate to use like fan fiction, but this one really did. I think it worked. In the movie, The 13th Warrior, not Michael Crichton and the Eaters of the Dead and all of that. Not going to try to go into that, but the idea was during the movie, they were laughing when the storms were coming, when the waves were going up and down. They continuously reemphasized this stanza in that movie when they were even picking up their dead comrades. They were still kind of making jokes. I think a lot of people in the do this as well. And for people who are never in the military, or perhaps, but we're in a different thing like sports or police or firemen or something where there's like this unit-based kind of mentality, you'll find this kind of dark and often biting and funny humor that is accompanied with people that are kind of putting their lives on the line sometimes, or with the possibility of getting greatly hurt. And they do it kind of chuckling. And some people would say, oh, that's just a way they're dealing with their fear. But in a lot of ways, after a while, no, you end up kind of becoming, it becomes all kind of funny in a way. And I don't know if that's not necessarily like an absurd thing, because there is a honed humor to it that kind of finds a grittiness in some of the worst situations. I think this is a noble trait. And I think it's also very much a Teutonic Aryan trait of being kind of a counterbalance between ultra serious and also laughing at oddly dire situations. All right, so we're moving to stanza 15 or stanza 16.
Yeah, and before we do, this is one of those instances. I think sometimes a question goes in when I talk about nobility and when I speak about why the AFA uses the word Aryan. It's the same root word as aristocracy. The idea of nobility of bearing, nobility of behavior. This last stanza wasn't like, no, literally, if you are, the next in line for a throne, this is what you do. No, it was these things are thought to be regal. They're thought to be noble for a man to carry himself as a prince, for one to carry themselves with thoughtful behavior when at the feasting bench, and to also be bold in battle and to be brave and to, be glad and have an uplifted spirit up to the very point of his death. That ability to hold your head up, stick your chest out, and carry yourself with nobility is fundamental to what the word Aryan exhorts our people to be and to live up to. And I think that that is a very important thing to internalize.
Well, and the stanza thereafter is kind of seamless with it, because it immediately refers, perhaps not to the silence and the wisdom, but again, gladly going forth into your fate, and knowing that we are. It's been set before us. We know this so clearly. None of us are getting out of this alive. So you move forward and you act out your deeds with that, knowing that you can accomplish much once you kind of lose that anxiety. The sluggard believes he shall live forever. I like the word sluggard. That is not used enough in this day and age. The sluggard believes he will live forever if the fight he faces not, but age shall not grant him the gift of peace, though spears may spare his life. And this one, I think a lot of people are familiar with, and they may have heard other translations that are kind of, more common. A coward instead of sluggard, thinks he will live forever if he, eschews from a fight or holds back in battle. But age will not spare him, and he could or his time will, aches and pains and illness will dog him, though spears have spared him in a moment. So that's kind of and the only reason I'm bringing that up is because it does make that good context, is that the coward, the sluggard, thinks that he'll live forever if he doesn't face up in the moment, if he doesn't show up to the line, if he thinks that he can kind of eschew it, that he's going to somehow avoid things. But in the end, it doesn't matter. You're going to get, age, ailment, regret, all these things.
Regret will dog him more than any of these other things. Regret is one of the greatest scourges that can occur to this. And we live in a day and age, and this is something that we end up talking about a lot in the world that we live in, because we've become very comfortable. Most of us are not tested on the physical battlefield. Most of us are tested in much more subtle ways. So the idea of courage, sometimes folks don't put it in a modern context. There's no courage without consequence. Consequence happens, and it's what makes victory and courage valuable. So many of our people are very beaten down, and they're scared of their own shadow. They're scared of everything. They're scared of what possible. One of the biggest things that they're scared of, and I think that we all have a tendency to fear, is the unknown. But we're always constantly worried that, something's out to get us, or maybe something bad could happen. I got in a, discussion with someone on Twitter because I dared talk about how courage was important. And their advice to our folk was to just keep their head down and not say anything and breed. And that's our job. And as long as we pass on our genetics to the next generation, then that's good enough. And I have seen few things as flailing and frantic as the coward trying to justify his cowardice. Because internally, we all know better. So there's a desperation to no, not me, because you see, it's all part of my secret plan. the fact that we feel compelled to do that should tell us that we ought to be courageous in the first place. But yeah, it's important they talk about this here, and this is directly connected to, no, that's how a nobleman, that's how an eighthling, that's how a prince behaves, is with courage.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we have seen so often in this battleground that is the attainment of our ability to practice our ethnic faith unabashed, and a lot of the things that go with that, and some things strike true and some things don't, and I think people get convoluted, but the idea is that you do show up, and that this is the thing that gets me the most is having faith in yourself, in the humming of your ancestors, and in the gods themselves. Like a required thing in order to kind of break through the din of a lot of people's fear that they harbor with them in this wolf age, is that you really find these people that are like, oh, I'm going to do this for the gods, I'm going to do this for this, and then they again construct a huge framework of why they're suddenly doing something very different. Or like what you had said was that they will talk about, I'll fight dragons, but they won't do a food drive or place, or speak openly on a podcast or on a website. It's very telling. And we see it often. So I think that, the Hávamál is maybe perhaps even more poignant in a lot of things. But again, applying this to your work, applying this to your home, applying this to the military, it's so much here that is, again, amazing. We're on stanza 17. Let's see. The fool is agape when he comes to the feast. He stammers or else is still. But soon if he gets a drink, is it seen what the mind of this man is like. So again, there is this sense that the fool is just loose. He is undisciplined, unbridled, uncouth, if you will, and he stammers or else is still. So again, he's lost in himself. He's lost in his own anxieties. He's lost in his own fears. He's not confident with himself. And then when he gets a drink in him, he just lets it loose. And I think this is kind of one of those things that we find in our culture today, in modern culture, where we see if someone is perhaps doesn't exhibit a lot of outward confidence or what have you, and they get a little, social lubricant, a little liquid courage in them, the good gift of Thrúður gets to flow through him, and he gets that strength. Perhaps there's an achievement or a breaking of walls, but some people, most often, they often bear their ass, whether figuratively or sometimes literally if they go too far. Is that and then it really is a testament to how they are when they're sober. So this stanza really, to me, is that the idea is that you can see people when they're drunk as kind of a facsimile of what they are when they're sober, or perhaps they exude a great amount of their weaknesses depending on how they act, after they have lost a lot of inhibitions. I've had the pleasure of sitting down and feasting with many good folk, and they drank quite a bit, but they've always been so either adhering to their mental state, perhaps a little bit more joyous, a little bit more happy, a little bit more open, but never to the point where they're so loose and so lost that it's just like, man, I wonder what this guy like lives with when he's quiet and alone in it, what kind of fears and things kind of direct him. And they just get all matted out because of, you get a little sip in you. I don't know if you had anything on that one as well. I was here about stanza 17.
No, other than the inability to have your will control your actions. And that doesn't mean not to share of yourself. But this talks about accidentally, like, oh, I had a little bit to drink, hey, and just laying it all out amongst randos unintentionally is different. If you're choosing to have a few and you're choosing, all right, this is a good time, we're both drinking a little bit, and I want to share deeply of who I am and my inner thoughts to somebody that I trust, and we're sharing, by all means, do that. That's beautiful. That's a good thing to do if you're choosing to, but not because you're getting sloppy because you've lost control of your actions. And this applies to myriad things, but very specifically here talking about alcohol and you being a guest and a stranger in a strange place. You losing control of stuff, you start over speaking, over sharing, overspending, overeating, over drinking, and it's, it makes you a very, very compelling target for any number of unpleasant things.
Stanza 18, he alone is aware who has wandered wide and far abroad has fared. How great a mind is guided by him, the wealth of wisdom has. So this is an interesting one. It seems kind of a benign and perhaps even a re-emphasizing, but I like it because it does make a great point about something that we talked about in another Victory Never Sleeps, about the soul, the thought and the memory, the idea of memory being a wealth, a treasure trove of things that have taught you through experience. So you think while you are experiencing and you learn from your memory, and it becomes a valued thing. And the only way you can do that is if you test yourself, if you go out, if you find that adversity, if you seek the horizons and push yourself towards things. That's when you find those experiences, and those experiences are the treasure you're giving yourself. And that's why I really do like this stanza, because it's so I don't know, it's a salt of the earth kind of wisdom. Is if you travel wide, you will gain much in your experiences, and no greater treasure do you have than the memories and the lessons you learned by doing that. And I think in our culture, I mean, I know you've traveled all over, from the far, far north to the deep, deep south, and all of those
I've been
things.
very, very fortunate that way.
Yeah, I think it's super important that our readers understand that, the culture of our ancestors and the cultures of the Nords at the time was very much built around travel, around experiencing things, going over that mountain or crossing over that sea, and having the joys of seeing those things and seeing those travels. I think a lot of our enemies might think that we're some sort of like flyover country bumpkins or something of that. And I laugh at that notion. I mean, I don't know. I surprised my son once, because I don't think I ever mentioned it to him, but we were watching some television, or perhaps it was on his school, because it was making reference to Mount Fuji. And I said, "Oh, I climbed that." And he was like, "What?" And so we stopped everything. He wanted to hear this story about me climbing Mount Fuji. And I told him everything. It was great. It's not something I often lead with. I don't know if I've ever told you that story, Asatru, but again, it was really, really a great experience. And so I think that it's a treasure trove for me. I don't mind telling my son. He thought it was the coolest thing ever, and that's kind of cool. It made me feel good about that. But there was lessons to be learned, and it was a very, very good experience. And I would have got it if I had just chose to stay home and work in my well, it was a factory here at the time that I was working in, and no shame in it, as an old, especially if I like now in my age, like working to feed your family. But I was a young man, and the fact if I had kind of remained bellied at the bar and stuck in the factory I was at, I would have never experienced that if I hadn't said, I got to go out there and just kind of like test these limits, test these horizons. All before 9/11, all before that, I was something worth, I think, noting. A lot of military guys are like, you were in before 9/11. That's crazy. But yes. And so there wasn't a lot going on, and I was kind of getting stagnant. And I think that's a lot of this. And for a lot of people that might, I was talking to Asatru Godi about this before I left. My mother printed out a Hávamál for me to take with me when I left for boot camp, as a sense of reading, something that I could just bring me respite, and it was kind of nice. But these maxims have been with me through a lot of these experiences, and now as we're going through them piece by piece, I'm kind of thinking back. I just wanted to bring that up, is that if you have the opportunity to push that threshold and boundary, even if it was to go to the next town over, or to make a friend in another state, or to travel to a moot in a place you've never been, do it. It's worth it. Get out on that road. Again, a lot of these alcohol ones are kind of poignant to me as a, lessons sometimes when I run into young guys who are really, really heavy on the time in their lives of drinking. This is not only just my experiences, but it's like, it's in the Hávamál. Calm down. Stanza 19 is, shun not the mead, but drink in measure. Speak to the point or be still. For rudeness none shall rightly blame thee, if soon thy bed thou seekest. And this one's kind of often translated as well. Spurn not the horn, but don't drink over much. Again, that's the same thing as it is drinking in the measure. Speak forthright, or don't speak at all. And no one will think you rude. No one will consider you a braggart or a sluggard if you decide that it's time that guys, it's been fun, it's been great, I gotta go home, I gotta do this, I have to do that. You showed up, you shared an experience, but sometimes it's for the better, is that you have to get home in order to make sure you're getting up and getting out of bed and doing what you need to do the next day. No one can fault you for that.
This is something that I think is valuable as well to be aware of. And again, this isn't a prohibition against being that last guy up around the fire. There can be advantage to it. There can also be disadvantage. When you are a young man traveling somewhere and you're in a strange company, sometimes less is more. Sometimes speak to the point. If you got something good to say, be reserved. Speak less. That makes the words that you say mean more. And then drop the mic and go to bed. The longer that you stay and overspeak and over put yourself out there, the more the attention is on you, for good or for bad. The more everybody else in the crowd dies off and they all start going to bed, and you're that last guy staying up, all eyes are on you. And maybe you don't want them to be. There's something to be said for leaving them wanting more.
And you get the next day, like clear.
That's something true, especially going to Asatru events, and especially when it was more common to go to like a campground or like a campground or a lodge situation for moots. You want to be the last guy up so you can soak up all of the fellowship and all of the conversation and all of the fun. But you also want to be that first guy up in the morning to do all the, important things and get breakfast the next day and do all the things you need to do. And older you get, the less and less you can be both.
Right.
There's a balance to be found there. And, I've certainly seen my ability to do both diminish over my years being involved.
Yeah, I think I find myself as a night owl more often, and even at like at Sigerheim, not imbibing in the horn or anything, but being around people and making sure they get to their tents and being that kind of that last guy. You do get those special moments of seeing all the folk kind of go to bed and are safe. And I got a chance to go up in the middle of the night and sing songs up there to to your mother and to the others that are up there, and kind of quietly kind of go back down into the night and kind of hit the tent. It was really, really beautiful. But yes, the next morning, like I lost some of that edge in that front half because I was up, singing songs to those who have passed. And I kind of missed, I think, some important stuff. Had to be woken up, someone banging on the tent. Get up! You're somebody's looking for you.
There's value in both. Just make sure you're choosing what you do. I tend to stay. If it's choosing between staying late and getting up early, if you come to events, you will seldom share breakfast with me. just put it that way. But yeah, I think these, and especially this front end and I realize that we're taking a very long time on a very few stanzas, but they're important, and we'll go as long as we've got to do on these. So we'll see how many we get through. I think that.
Do you want to do like 25? And then
I've got an idea in my mind of about where we're going to cut off, and I think that idea is well this side of 79. So, but yeah, I think these are really good. I think they're extremely important. What I was going to say, the front end of this, not only is it very straightforward, but it's very applicable to our lives. You don't have to put yourself in a different time, in a different place. You don't have to delve deeply into the realm of myth to take these very, very good counsels for how to conduct yourself as a man when you're away from home, when you travel, when you're in social settings. This is extremely valuable, and it's also very, very accessible.
Yeah, and again, the whole culture here is reemphasizing. Now we kind of move into not just the over drinking, but now to the overeating, and this comes into a great point. I think it shows about your expectations and reservation towards being an overtaking guest. Or being a burdensome guest. And that's, stanza 20 talks about it. The greedy guest, or the greedy man, if his mind be vague, will eat till sick he is. The vulgar man, when among the wise, to scorn by his belly is brought. And I really, I like how it's even emphasized that, to be overly greedy and in that way is even a testament against your wisdom. And that, of course, is emphasized in a few stanzas coming up. But yeah, the greedy man who doesn't moderate himself will eat his own sickness. And again, his belly will bring laughter. from amongst his guests. You know, the vulgar man, when amongst the wise, will gain scorn because of his belly.
So this is okay. So this does harken back to a comment in the chat room about obesity, but it's. I will say this in a couple of different ways of taking this that are both valuable. If you're in a social situation that involves food and drink, it's very compelling to just sit there and drink yourself silly because you don't know what else to do. You look awkward if you don't have anything in your hands, but if you got a drink in your hand, you look less awkward. And you drink when you're nervous, and you drink, and then you got to get another drink, and then another, and then before you know it catches up with you. And we've talked that to death. I get that. But the other thing that's easy to do is, well, I look like I'm busy. I don't look like I'm sitting here being awkward if I'm eating, so I'm just going to keep eating. And I'm going to eat for comfort, and I'm going to eat for, to cure my social anxieties, and you can do that. And and people notice. The other thing is having the self-awareness of when people are looking at you and you are eating more than is normal. If you're that guy that's like sloppily eating, if you lose focus on the social environment you are in and are instead focused on the trough, people make judgments. The other thing, and I will say this, I noticed this today, and we've all seen this, and I think it's easy to make fun of, but I don't say this to make fun. I say this to remind our folk who are listening, people are watching you. If you're someone that has an obesity problem, don't be the fat guy that's sitting there eating McDonald's where people can see you. They will laugh at you, and you don't want that. Be aware of things. Be aware of your situation. Don't make a meme of yourself in a negative way. Just that kind of self-awareness. It's really important. And subtle things, when people are apt to judge you and apt to look at you, are really important. Maybe if you're struggling with your weight and you're around people, choose to make your plate look like you want it to look. If you got to go back to your hotel room and snarf down the snacks, cool, do that. Invite me over. We will pig out together on the snacks. Cool. But when you're in the presence of people and people are judging you, be aware and put your best foot forward. Be aware of how you look to others. Don't become overly focused on the refreshments. And this sounds like just such a small and mundane thing to talk about on a religious program, but it's real. All these little things count. Little things add up to big things. And we all want to project the best image of ourselves, of our family. And here's the thing, when you travel and you're at an event, whatever it is, you are an ambassador for your family, for groups that you are a known part of. If you're an AFA member, when you travel, you represent the AFA when you go places. They will associate the AFA, good or bad, with your actions and how you present yourself. Same thing with your family and your people, and that's what those folks are up to. That's what y'all do where you're from, and they'll. So making a good example of that, this is essential to what that concept of nobility is about.
I keep going back to this in my thought as you're talking about, like, this is also like, this is a moot reference guide. And I don't mean that I mean it in the sense of a meetup or a moot. When you go and you meet other fellow AFA members, perhaps in your area, or if a folk builder or Govi is holding a moot and you're, maybe it's at a pub, or maybe it's at a bowling alley, or maybe it's at the beach, or at a hike. The first half the beginnings really do kind of apply with the way that both whoever's hosting the moot and whoever's coming to it. This is a great way. Again, that cultural infusion of correct etiquette. This all really is part of the wisdom of Snotra. Our Lady Snotra is the goddess of etiquette, norms, cultural cohesion through proper and right action. And so this, this kind of the living embodiment of her dominion is in the again, gaining renown or losing renown based on how people act. So like you go to a moot, and let's say I'm hosting a moot and everything's great and everything's good, and then all of a sudden I'm like eating 7 plates, and I'm kind of like talking with my mouth open, and just all of a sudden it's like, ugh. You got to take into account. I mean, I'm not saying you can't dig into stuff when you're like, when I'm around my family and we're all eating together, it's fun, it's good. And sometimes, proprieties are often left aside, especially with the little ones and all of that. And, but when you're out and you're out amongst folk and you're learning or teaching or just getting together in order to progress forward our faith, take a lot of these social considerations into mind. They're important. I like this too. The herd knows well when home they shall fare, and when from the grass they go. But the foolish man his belly measures shall never know aright. Even the cows know when to go home. Even the cows know when to quit.
So this is the perfect time to answer a previous question, the question that I've alluded to a couple of times that came up in the chat room. We are now on the fat verses, and I think this is the appropriate time. Before we do that, though, Daniel Skinner gave us $25 and a question, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, Daniel. Your contribution is much appreciated. I said, hail the folk, hail the AFA. Question, what is the end goal of Sigerheim? What would you like to see happen? So I'll lay out a couple things, and I'm happy to expound upon it more, but I think of far-reaching goals, but I don't like to conceive in terms of an end goal, because to my mind, it's going to be something that's perpetually built upon. The goals I would like to see at Sigerheim within my lifetime, I would like there to be a nucleus that's at our actual land that includes a Hof to Lord Tyr, that includes a feasting, drinking, merriment hall to enjoy each other's company, to share good times with, to share bad times with, to share life with, to have a communal hall there. I'd also like to have guest facilities where people could stay there, but also facilities to where if we have members that are infirmed, that need a place to be, or that are elderly and don't have other folk to help take care of them, so that they can be there and still actively participate in our AFA family with people who care about them and who watch over them. I'd like it to be a place where we can pool resources, whatever that might look like, when people are struggling, when people are having a hard time, to where our people have a place to go, and people who love them and care for them, no matter what life brings. Having that fundamental security for our folk is really important to me there. And I'd like that to expand out to where we get a significant number of members living in the surrounding county. anywhere in that county, in Jackson County, Tennessee, puts folks within a half an hour of the Hoff and Sigerheim proper. So I really want to build that village, that community of AFA members that are bound by our common loyalty to the ICEER and to our AFA. That's what I'd like to see, and I think all of that is certainly attainable, and I'm looking forward to that progressing. It's progressing as it is. It's never progressing quite as much as I want it to, but no matter how fast it came, I'd want it to come faster because I've got a lot of things that I want to see accomplished. But I would imagine that we will have 2 or 3 families out there within the next 2 years. I hope we can get it quicker than that, but that's my thought process as far as anything solid. But those are kind of my goals with it. And again, thank you for your donation. Back to the fat thing for a second. The question read like this. Sorry, I got to scroll back up to it. I heard being morbidly obese is a gross violation of the noble virtues, discipline, and industriousness. Why? And is this also supported by the Hávamál? Yes, you can see the last 2 stanzas clearly talking about if you are, if your defining characteristic is your belly and how much you are eating, that was, not thought to be noble and graceful by our folk. The other thing, how you look and the physical state of yourself speaks volumes about your certain personal characteristics. Being in impeccable physical condition speaks amazingly positive, like, wow, this person has the discipline and the commitment to be it takes work to be in impeccable shape, to be an athlete, to be fit to the point where you've got definable abs and whatever else. That says that you're able to have mastery over your wants. It means that you're able to train regularly, and even when you don't want to, or even when it's not convenient. It means you're able to stick to a diet that's, restrictive in a lot of ways. Or if you start out scrawny, it means you stick to a diet that maybe you're eating uncomfortably much of just the right things to get where you're at. It says that you are capable of putting in that effort over a sustained period of time to produce a certain result. The other thing is a value that has always been a value to our folk. Just because somebody picked 9 way back when, those are by no means the end all be all of our virtues. They are certainly noble virtues, but there's more. And one of those is beauty. Aesthetics and celebrating things that are beautiful has always been a fundamental to our folk, and it still is today. So you want to look good, and obesity doesn't look good. And there is a reason that people assume that fat people are undisciplined and lazy. That's outside of what is politically correct to say in the wolf age, but it's honest. And we all have our failings and things that we can improve on. And one of the things that's unfortunate about obesity is it takes a long time to fix. The person who asked the question said morbidly obese. If you find yourself morbidly obese and you want to change it, you're not going to change it tomorrow, and you're not going to change it a year from now, maybe. It takes a really long time. So I will say this too, and again, a first impression is a first impression, but people who know you over time, if you are obese and you're working on it, if and when you overcome it, and to the degree by which you overcome it, that speaks to your discipline as well. That speaks to your industriousness. So, it's not, don't hang your head in shame if you find yourself there. Pick yourself up and start tomorrow making the right choices so you can get to a better place. Overcoming it speaks to the discipline as well. So just keep that in mind. But yes, absolutely. That is a very obvious and very front forward expression of a lack of industriousness and discipline up to a certain point in your life. And whether we want people to or not, people will definitely judge you for it. And we do judge others for it, along with a bunch of other things, but that's certainly one of them.
Well, I see a question. Are there fitness requirements for folk builders? Since I think we're
So okay, that's relevant to what we're on here. No, but there is. Okay, so to become an apprentice folk builder, no. To continue forward with folk building, to become an oathed folk builder, a bit more so. To train to become a Gothi or a Githia, more so than that. The idea isn't that one has to be in a certain physical condition to pursue that, but it means when one decides to pursue that, they need to be moving forward towards getting in a better physical condition if they find themselves far outside of the line of what's healthy and what's good. We want to give all our people an opportunity to step forward. And as I mentioned, if you find yourself at a certain level of obesity, it can take a decade of your life to try to get yourself out from under that. We don't ask that that's where it has to be, but we would like it to be moving that direction. And more so the higher up in leadership that you find yourself.
I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, I guess, experiencing criticisms from more perhaps universally minded internet heathens, if you will. And they were speaking about how, we wear ties and we have these haircuts, and these haircuts, they look so militant, or whatever words, I can't remember. He was telling me, he was laughing. And they just stopped short of, again, the fitness aspect and then the ability to, be in fair shape, if not good shape. And he was just like, this is what you're criticizing these people on, is that they dress well and they take care of themselves and they consider this an important part. And it really, these stanzas remind me that this isn't just some sort of arbitrary thing. This is a deep cultural and religious aspect of our faith, is that you should be trying to improve. You should be trying to get better. You should be caring about the way you look. Work at it.
And that's something to note about folk builders. We are at a stage where it's not like we're going out and selecting who we think is the best candidate for folk building. These are people that volunteer and step up and say, hey, I want to help build our church. I want to help build our folk. I would like to step forward and do that. So yes, they're putting themselves out there. And if we have a folk builder step up that is overweight, there's criticism that comes in for that. What's unfortunate is that criticism doesn't see, where they were, where they're headed, or a trajectory. But it's honest, and that's fair. But what also should be noted on that is that they have the courage to put their name and their face behind their loyalty to our church and the ICER. And that's one of the reasons that there's not nearly as many folk builders as we would like there to be, is a lot of people lack that courage. So make sure that we're viewing a totality. Like, yes, you can see a negative in their current physical condition, perhaps, but you can also see a positive in their courage and their willingness to step forward when needed. And that's tremendously valuable. So, one of the things that it's important to keep in mind is we can all be better than we are today, and we want to help each other be better tomorrow than we are today. And that looks really different depending on where you're at in any of your personal levels of development. And with folks who are dealing with being overweight, it's a very front facing thing. A lot of folks have deep problems that are hidden and that are very internal, but sometimes are more drastic. But that's certainly literally on the face of things something.
All right, so we're on 22. Let's see. A paltry man and poor of mind at all things ever mocks. For never he knows what he ought to know, that he is not free from his own fault, or from faults, excuse me. He is not free from faults. I like this one a lot too, because it does talk about a real bad sickness that we have. Again, I think you kind of alluded to it, that the floundering of a coward, a person who constructs things in order to kind of alleviate a lot of their own inner avarices. This one too is a big one I've noticed as of the last couple of decades, is cynicism. Again, to cover a lot of one's own faults, and that cynicism and that desire to tear things down, to prod at what people are doing, to naysay what they're doing, to I don't know, change them, like shift the goalpost, if you will, has a tendency to come out in this, form of like sniding, scoffing sense, that this person can mock things that are going on and is completely oblivious to their own, and oftentimes is mocking in order to hide their own. But it's not often seen enough to where people with wisdom will realize, well, that this person is mocking someone who's, what is this person doing? Why are they doing it? And how are they conducting themselves? Instead of just paying attention to, they're not well read, or they're not, they're doing this wrong.
This is made 1,000 times worse in the age that we live in with social media. And we see this all of the time on Twitter. It's very fortuitous that this comes right after the posts about people who are, about the fat posts or the fat stanzas, because that's something that is very easy to poke fun at. If you are feeling lacking internally, we can all point at the fat guy and laugh, instead of acknowledging different stuff that we all may need to work on, but it may be more hidden. And I think people have a tendency to do that. One thing I notice, we have from time to time gotten people who complain about how AFA members or perhaps AFA folk builders look. And then I try to look at their profile picture, and there's some kind of cartoon nonsense that's not real. They're not willing to put a picture of themselves out there, but it's real easy to enter into the discussion complaining about someone else. There's lots of people there's a lot of basement do-nothings that want to criticize everything that anyone does that's successful in order to justify their lack of meaningful existence. And it's way easier to make fun than it is to go out there in a realm that you might not be comfortable with, challenge yourself to put your best self forward and to build something. it's always so much easier to tear down than it is to build up. And I think that we all know that it's a much easier thing to destroy than to build. It's worthwhile to note that, you know, the two wolves that chase the sun and the moon, seeking to snuff out light from existence, literally mean the mocker and the hater. And I think that's worth contemplating. You know, it's literally those that sit around on the sidelines and criticize. That's what devours success and our ability to move forward.
Yeah, I was looking at the comment where, you know, when will the internet heathens address Lord Woden's fat phobia? I've pondered that myself too. Let's see, and we're on
23.
23. The witless man is awake all night, thinking of many things. Careworn he is. When the morning comes and his woe is just as it was. I like this stanza too. This one, it kind of, you know, I outside of my faith, I think a great, some pillars of application and thought that have really helped me. One of them is getting introduced to Stoicism while I was in the military. And this is kind of the Stoic quote, or the Stoic stanza, if you will, that I really, really like. It's about that anxiety. You know, you fret over the future, but you'll face that present moment with the same tools you have now. You know, the same integrity you have, the ability for you to do things. So, you know, again, it's you know, now we're getting into what, like, I guess mental issues, you know, with all of these people nowadays glorifying, I have anxiety, I have bipolar disorder, I have all of these things that they're just kind of parading around as, I don't know, badges or whatever they have. But here, Lord Woden is saying, you know, again, he's speaking about anxieties. A witless man is awake all night, thinking of many things. You're grinding yourself, and in the morning, they're not gone. So you need to have that confidence of gaining good sleep and moving forward, you know, knowing that you'll have to tackle those problems when you get to them, instead of, you know, hand wringing and biting of the fingernails and fretting the possibilities that haven't been even woven by the Norns yet. I really, really do like this one.
Yeah, I've mentioned it enough, but our people are crippled with fear. And so much of that fear is amplified by the aspect of the unknown. I've seen so much fear amongst our folk by their conditioning than by actual consequence. It's more the fear of what if. They assume that every confrontation equals their destruction, that every eye on who they are and what they're doing equals their whole life's done. And that the one does not necessarily equal the other. Fear is a powerful tool of our enemies that costs them very little and can prevent anyone from doing anything. And if we don't overcome that kind of fear, we can't ever build momentum towards positive things.
Let's see, 24. The foolish man. For friends all those who laugh at him will hold, when among the wise he marks it not, though hatred of him they speak. That this one is more along the lines of where Bellows is going with his translations. I think the overall point of this is that a fool, thinks that all the people that laugh, with him are his friends. And, that he doesn't see them being malicious or having, a certain sense of scorn or sneering at him when he sits amongst the wise, because he's unable to differentiate. Or worst off, I think this could also mean in a sense where like a fool who flings insults at people thinks that everyone that is there will laugh and join in with him. They think that because he's leading the charge on some notion that every horse is with him kind of thing. And you might not realize in the setting of things is you're kind of, on your own or alone, or worse off, you're festering enemies. So, yeah, I think when amongst the wise, he marks it not. He doesn't realize, though he's brewing hatred for himself by being this kind of, callous and cynic person, or this doom kind of gravitated person, constantly in the in the black pill. They're constantly in the doom mindset, or they're in this cynicism and this, again, mocking people that are doing things. Meanwhile, he might even be festering things amongst himself, because what's the one thing, if you hear someone mocking you, one of the first human inclinations is do they say the same things about me that they're saying about other people?
I don't think that people do have that thought, unfortunately, and they should. They absolutely should. I was thinking of a very specific group of people. And I mentioned this at the top of the show. People bond often over gathering together to laugh at someone else. We all do it to one degree or another, but I've seen a lot of situations where it manifests in a really toxic way. I knew this group of 3 women. I knew them all individually. And then I would interact with them and see them interact with each other in pairs. Any combination would spend their entire time together trashing the third one. And then you'd shuffle them up, and then the other 2 would trash the third one. And then the other combination, those 2 would trash the third one. And it didn't seem to occur to all of them that, no, wait, when I'm not here, they're all bashing me. Folks do that when we have people in common, but it's one of those things. It's really easy to think that everybody who's laughing amongst you must be laughing with you and not at you. Very often, it's the opposite of the case.
Yeah, and this reiteration of stanza 24 and 25, the first parts of these stanzas are, again, a poetic repetitional form. Perhaps the doubling of the front of these stanzas is a cue for the poet to understand that from these 2 we might be moving into something else or something of another nature. And so you'll find these kind of road mark stanzas, and they often are manifesting in repetitive prose or repetitive meter. And here is the same thing. The unwise man, the foolish man, for friends all those who laugh at him will hold. But the truth, when he comes to the council, he learns few will speak. Few in his favor will speak. So again, the repetitiveness of the foolish man for friends, all those who laugh at him will hold. This again is those people that are often with you, those people that you joke and kind of snide at others with, when a time comes for your merit or for someone to be brave enough to stand with you at the Ulthing or the council or the gathering, or perhaps it could be anything. It could be an integrity moment when you're at work and somebody in higher ups want to speak with you, and or just anything of that nature. And you find that the people that were laughing, jeering, and sniding are either not in agreement with you or very much cut of the same cloth, and you wouldn't show up for them. They're not going to show up for you. You're on your own. They were with you when the laugh was there, but it's nothing of substance. I really, I enjoy that because again, it references to the Althing, the in Iceland, the gathering of everyone, and oftentimes litigations and disputes were settled and things like that. And this is a warning to those people. It's like when you really count on it, you need to make sure you have people of good integrity. You need to surround yourself with people who aren't always jeering and poking and prodding and being cynics of so many things when it's really serious and time comes. And so we kind of go into like, these are when we start getting into the merit, the value, and the wisdom of a man and his company. We're moving into stanza 26. An ignorant man thinks that all he knows when he sits by himself in a corner, but never what answer to make he knows when others with questions come. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing here. It's like you spearheaded that, the idea of being able to answer questions on the fly, to just face what people want to know and answer honestly and wisely. And I think that a lot of people that don't partake in ever opening themselves up to that form of criticism, or their ability to just kind of comment and talk, shows that, yeah, I mean, they're always, oh, I know the answers to all that, but it never wants to be questioned about it. So he just kind of scuttles off and goes into the books or goes into the big one I've always noticed in this day and age is blogs. The idea of people that make blogs and they write about things. Sometimes their insight can be interesting and whatever, but so a lot of people like go into this refuge of having an answer for everything, but it's in a medium in which you can't be engaged. I have some of the social media apps where it's like that, where it's just all out and no in. There's no discourse. There's no questions. Like, that's why I love this. The VNS is that we can see these questions, but some people like to post in things where they don't have to really answer any questions. They just, this is what I believe and this is what it is, and that's that. And if you think otherwise, you're dumb. And it's like, having an open forum is a great way to find meat and potatoes of someone's mind.
Yeah, reality is the proving ground of ideas. Everybody thinks their ideas are the best ideas. Otherwise, why wouldn't they think them? But if you're not willing to put them into practice or have them tested or speak them in front of people and see the reaction, they're of no value. When you put things, Svan and I have talked about this a lot in a more overtly spiritual context, but the magic of taking something that is an idea internally and speaking it makes it real, and it puts down a flag that can be challenged. And very often people don't have the courage to stand behind their ideas, but have the courage to maybe even say them on, again, in a blog or in a social media thing with a fake name and a fake picture and a fake whatever, it's really different when you go out there and you put your name and your reputation behind the things that you say.
Sorry, just thinking of the joke we were talking about, the internet Vikings, like with names like a bloodborne pathogen son, and he's speaking about how, you know, I actually I got that on Twitter when someone was talking about the rudimentaries of my paintings, and saying that, you know, it just looks so it looks so elementary, and then he kind of posted like, you know, a comic book version and like one that was bordering on homoeroticism apart, and I was like, ah. And then he like two classical art pieces which I knew about and was like, oh, those are really good, I like those. But it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, go do better, like prove.
That's so that's kind of that's something that I do on Twitter, and I try really hard not to engage in just nonsense. But when people ask those things, you know, it's like I said earlier about people who want to comment negatively, saying that, you know, a member or folk builder's ugly or fat or whatever they say. Often I don't say this because I think it might look, I don't know, might not look dignified, but it occurs to me, you know, well, can we see what you look like? Oh, so you said this with a fake name and a picture of somebody from a comic book. You know, how valuable is your opinion at that point? It's like, you know, Svan's art is rudimentary. Okay, well, can you show us your amazing artwork? And if you're a fine artist, then cool, maybe we should listen to what you have to say. And if you aren't, maybe you shouldn't say stuff.
Right.
Somebody did that. We posted a picture of children in Thorshof doing a children's bloat.
I remember this one.
Somebody was like, ugh, that looks so uninspired. Ugh. They posted, and I don't know how they posted the noise I made, but I inferred it captures the essence. But yeah, and my response was, you know, oh, okay, well, you know, how do the children who do bloat in one of your hofs, how does that look? Can you show that to us so we can learn from it? You know, well, I didn't mean that. I meant the building itself. Okay, well, can you show us pictures of how you've decorated your hof? And nothing. And some of it, you know, is a jab, but not really. It's honest. It's, if you're bringing something better to the table, then by all means, let's learn from it. But if you're complaining just to complain, what are you comparing it to? You're comparing us worshiping our gods in hofs with children to your sitting in mom's basement and typing something nasty on Twitter. So yeah, I think that's worthwhile. As they said in the side chat, physique or no critique.
That's awesome. That's
it is. Well done.
Well, and the other thing is, like, I've heard people say, oh, they're always going to go back to that, and they're always going to try to, that's their one drum or whatever. It's like, no, the point is, one, you have no merit unless you have something to offer. And the most audacious wisdom that we're presenting is, if you have something of equivalence or greater, we would like to know. We want to learn from it. We want to hear it. Let's see it. We will try to surpass that.
Please know that when I say something like that, I am fully prepared. If his flex would have been to show me a picture of his hof with his kids doing a cooler, better, more powerful, more meaningful ritual than ours, I would be very, very open to hearing his insights on what we could do better or differently. And I really mean that. And just like the people who criticize, if they show me a picture and they're, some stunning beauty, or there's some, guy that is a competitive, bodybuilder, okay, absolutely. I will take that, fair point. But it's the people that don't want to put any skin in the game, that just want to criticize, that we're taking issue with.
So we are on
27.
27. A witless man again. A witless man, when he meets with men, had best in silence abide. For no one shall find that nothing he knows, if his mouth is not open too much. But a man knows not, if nothing he knows, when his mouth has been open too much. I mean, that is our version of the, let not your mouth be open too much, for your tongue will oftentimes be your own undoing. That is one for one right there. Is that the idiot who is silent and learns is 1,000 times more in worth than the idiot who just runs his suck all day and never, shuts up or listens or really gives anything of.
And, I think this is a time to mention about defensiveness. And I see this in a number of situations. And we go back to the fitness or lack thereof thing, because I see this, the biggest things that I see this displayed in are people who are obese or people who are cowardly. When courage is brought up, the coward feels the need to post all of his excuses and proactively voice, but what about, this? And what about if I have good reason to be scared? I wasn't talking to you, but since you stood up and have become the example of cowardice, like, all lights are on you now. What? You didn't need to say anything. You could have just sat there and done your thing. When we have a post sometimes, or when we talk in groups about fitness, people who are obese, which is, if that's what they want to do, I don't think that's a good choice, but that's certainly their choice to make. But they need to be the first ones who list all of the reasons that they can't possibly ever get in shape, and how they don't have motivation, and working out's too hard. And no, just sit there. Just sit there quietly. Nobody was pointing you out. Nobody was trying to, put anything in your face. But there's a compulsion when we feel lacking to go out swinging with some kind of justification, or go out swinging with some kind of excuse. Don't do that. That's a sign that something's broken. Instead, learn from the wisdom that's shared and apply it. Or worse, if you don't want to, just sit there and keep to yourself. That's okay too. Let's go ahead and hit 28. I think we are going to end with stanza 30 tonight.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I muted out I was getting some feedback from the clock, so I was like, oh, we're gonna.
No, your clock is a character on the program. People look forward to hearing your clock.
I know. Some people are like, the clock, it's good. So let's see, we're at wise 28. Why shall he seem who well can question and also answer well? Naught is concealed that men may say among the sons of men. So this one is the first one is basically simply stating that, you know, a wise man should be able to take questions and answer questions well. Even if you don't know the answer, the idea is to, I'm interested in that. I want to find the answer, or I'll find someone who knows the answer. However you deal with that, it's that noble essence of being questioned, being criticized. I think we see that a lot of times, perhaps like on social media and things like that, where people who have rationale, who are more grounded in traditionalism, and they start to speak up and they're kind of badgered or jackaled by you know, a lot of people that are constantly, you know, not even really asking the questions, but just badgering and nipping at their heels about things. And it's such a interesting look that any person of good mind or wisdom would gravitate towards the person who's willing to talk, who's willing to answer questions and also ask questions. You know, it's I think that's just interesting. But the part not is concealed. It is not a lot is concealed. Not is concealed. Much is hard to conceal when, you know, you sit amongst the men, when you sit amongst your folk and listen to their words. You know, you can basically, you can gain a lot by simply listening and digesting the information that's being spoken around you. I think that's really the kind of overall meaning of 28, is that you should, you know, wise men can answer questions, ask questions, and do well. But no wisdom is ever truly concealed if you sit and listen.
And this is, again, in the context of this, which is important, is a whole culture, and it sticks with us today as a valuable thing. When you're sitting around the fire or you're sitting around the table with learned people and you converse with them, those are proving grounds, because it's a conversation, it's back and forth. That was a common thing amongst our ancestors, is to question people or try to fool them with riddles, and you know, have a conversation to test your wits, and to have these discussions. And when done right, these discussions strengthen the participants. And if you find a circle of people that you ought not be talking in, then keep your mouth shut and just absorb the wisdom. But yeah, this is sound advice on interaction with the folk.
Stanza 29. Often he speaks who never is still with words that win no faith. The babbling tongue, if a bridle it finds not, oft for itself sings ill. This is the, you know, again, someone who's constantly speaking, or and I often take this too as like never still, when he rambles, but also too like when his opinion changes, when someone's a flip-flop, when someone's kind of speak kind words to the kind people that they're around, but then venom, you know, words elsewhere. You know, somebody who's kind of like a fence sitter, or who's on the side of convenience at all times. The babbling tongue will often be its own doom. And so I've taken this stanza two ways. One is that, you know, if you are kind of always running your mouth, I mean, I guess it is. It's like writing. Your mouth is writing checks that you're asking cash, or you can't, you know, check. And it's it is in this sense, but it also, I think, does a thing where deception, and in particular deception in order to avoid conflict. If you're over here, you know, there's somebody talking ill about another group, and you're like, oh yeah, and then you go to that group and they're talking ill about that. Oh yeah, and somewhere in the middle there, they're gonna find out that you're not particularly an ally to anyone, and you're kind of wish-washy, and that ends up garnering you enemies. It's better to just be forthright and stay your side and hold loyal to the one. You're ill that your tongue cannot weave you into anything if you're not playing the game of doing all this deception and things like that. I think that a lot of that it's harder work than people realize, or they often do it just because they're trying to avoid something, and it ends up getting them in trouble.
Let's hit the final one here, because I do have something to say about it, but I think it is equally applies to these last couple of them.
So stanza 30: in mockery no one a man shall hold, although he fare to the feast. Wise seems one oft, if not he is asked, and safely he sits dry skinned. So the structure of that one is, especially the dry skinned part, is more or less like that he's not being pelted by rain, that he's not being, challenged or criticized or scorned. So, in mockery, no one a man shall hold, although he fare to the feast. It's again, is you cannot throw poison at someone who's showing up. You could perhaps criticize or critique, I would say critique, but they're showing up, they're doing things, they're maintaining, and mocking them doesn't really do that much good. The wise seem off. One is oft, if not he is asked. So if he's never questioned, if he's never brought to to bear on the intelligence, it's there's no criticism. There's no one throwing it suffering at them. They're not out there kind of slinging it and getting pelted by the rain. So it's easy to call out from your window and say, like, that person's dumb, but at least they're showing up. At least they're trying. They're moving forward. They're doing better. While you're in the house, at the armchair, on the computer, or in the basement.
So things, it's a perfectly good option a lot of the time to just sit down and shut up if you don't have anything valuable to add. So often people clumsily stumble into situations where they get themselves in trouble because they can't abide silence or stillness, or they think they need to be the center of attention. Everybody's not a special snowflake. Sometimes you can just sit there and, say thank you when somebody hands you something, and listen and absorb. And you find the people that always need to immerse themselves in the middle of the conversation, that all of the last 6-7 stanzas have been about, no, if you open your mouth on something you don't know about, then you're digging yourself a hole. You're creating an opportunity for you to become a laughing stock and for you to lose face when you don't need to. So, sometimes you don't need to say anything if nobody's asking you. Everybody thinks that their opinion is valuable, and everybody has, an equally valuable opinion. They don't. There's a lot of times where your opinion doesn't matter. Nobody asked you. And that's sometimes hard for people. Sometimes people retract within themselves in social circumstances because they don't feel comfortable. And sometimes they overspeak. They're not comfortable with the silence, so they just go and stream of consciousness, dig themselves into an uncomfortable situation. So with that, we're going to call that good for our Hávamál verses tonight. we'll pick up more on that next week. We look forward to it. I don't know how many shows this will take, but we will do as many as we need to. It's really important, and I think we're much better served going through it slowly and thoroughly than rushing through things. But we do have some questions folks have asked. First one. So from Trent, and there's a couple just, how you doing? Somebody asked about a national event. All of those things were kind of taken care of in the chat. So the first question that's, for an answer really from Swan and I on this. Als Hergothi and Witan Svan, do you each have a favorite stanza? Which one is it and why? No, I don't, because there are a lot that are really good that stand out and that are really useful at different times. Two of my favorites are two or three of my favorites we went over tonight. The one about how a king's son should be bold to battle and be glad up until his death. That one is always meaningful to me. The one about, the coward can try to hide from battle, but he'll find no peace in old age is meaningful to me. And the one about not staying up all night stressing over things is also a particularly meaningful one that I go back to for different reasons. But those are just some. There's too many to choose one. What about you, Svan?
Overall, that's really hard to say. I think like at different times in my life, I've had favorites, but they were because they were applicable to the moment. But I think out of the ones that we talked about today, my absolute favorite is 19. It's don't spurn the horn, but be sparing with it, and say what you need to say forthright, but it's again, your tongue could lead you into rudeness by getting lost. And I think that is really, I don't know, perhaps one that I've learned the most from, and it becomes a glaring signpost when I see others perhaps do it. And it's not necessarily a thing where I'm like, aha, but more like, okay, duly noted. Perhaps they're not, in the right frame of mind at a certain point. It's like a threshold for me. When I see a person who can hold their own, even if they are drinking, they seem to be very well said and spoken, and they know when to kind of like bow out for the night and say good night. That threshold is like a measurement that I definitely hold people to at events or when we're meeting together and doing things. It's like, okay, I think this person might even they might not even know the Hávamál a lot, but they're subconsciously doing some wise things. And I think so 19 is kind of my favorite. I've always just liked the intro, spurn the horn not, but drink in measure. That's, I don't know, poetically it sounds cool.
So our next question comes from Odyssey. What is to be done about the Jewish problem? So I'd like first, I know that we have people with a lot of different ideas about different ethno-political realities. Honestly, my answer is we can stop focusing on it all the time. It's very easy to look at things that other groups of people do that we don't like, or that we would have them do differently, or that cause us reasons to stay up at night stressing over stuff. Let's not do that. What we can do best is be self-interested as far as our folk are concerned, support our people when we have causes to make ourselves better and to build better things for our folk, and spend all of our time and effort on doing that. If we all did that, none of these other groups of peoples would be able to damage us with the way that they're doing things. We would be able to build good things for ourselves. And I think that we can all see that if all of our folks stood together, we could accomplish anything we wanted. When all of our folk were the closest to being together at different points in history, we saw massive advances in civilization. The more that our folk battled amongst themselves and did not view our folk as a unified entity, but as petty little tribal squabbles over things within our own bigger folk, that's when other groups of people are able to break in. We've seen this. This is a thing in sociology and anthropology. Very often, empires don't fall because of outside forces. They fall because internal forces and internal dissension. And when the internal structure breaks, then the outside forces can pour in and take over or assert their own goals at the expense of that bigger culture's goals. And that's what we see with our folk. So I think that the thing to do with any question or concern about other races of people is to take care of our own and make ours strong. That is the best. That is the best all the way around. It's the only one that any of us have any access to being able to fix and address. And it's the one that's going to instill hope and heal the soul sickness that our people suffer from. But we can't look outside to do that and put all our problems on other groups of people. We have to recognize that we are the source of a great many of our own problems. If we realize that we are the ones who are allowing bad things to happen to ourselves, we are also the ones that are in the position to fix those things and make things better. And that's where I think our focus needs to be. Do you have anything to add on that, Svan?
I think two things you said, super key, paramount, and I would just add with it is, like you said, there is the what we can control, and the ideas we could. It puts us at a hard spot because a lot of people nowadays, when they talk about the folk, there is the folk who are in the community, and there's folk that are without the community. And a lot of times, a lot of their talking is, again, to try to wake people up or make them realize something. And I understand the need for that, but that doesn't fix things. That puts you in the debate room. Sometimes, especially if you're viable and you're actually, saying things of worth and merit. If you're bringing up, there's an ethnicity of people that are continuously doing aggravated things towards us. We should, our people should know that this is a thing. And I totally get that. But that doesn't actually change anything. What you should do is, on top of perhaps trying to make people aware and to consider the way you do it wisely, but is that you should let that go. That's all that people are doing is beating that pot, and turn around and say, okay, what are we doing to make ourselves better? What are we doing to go forward? And that, I think, is not as easy. So that is why a lot of people don't do it, or they get sucked into a lot of,
So that harkens back to a lot of the points that we've made tonight with our Hávamál study, though. It's so easy to bring awareness to something than it is to go out and fix a problem. It's very easy to identify bad things in the world or things that are, counter to our interests in the world. It's a much harder thing to actually build something of worth for our people. The two are arguably in the same sphere, but one actually makes life better for our folk, and one doesn't. Our next question: do you guys or anyone have the Hávamál memorized, like how some Christians will memorize parts of the Bible? Sections and verses, absolutely. The entirety, like from start to finish, I don't know anybody who can do that. I believe they're out there. That's something I'm baffled about. There are people who know their Bibles that well. And I don't just mean, a selection of 20, 30, 40, 50 verses that are meaningful to them or that they use in discussion often. There are some people that can, it's hard for me to believe that somebody could memorize it cover to cover, but there's some people out there that have vast chunks of their Bible, like they can go and they have it all memorized. And my mind has never worked that way when it comes to memorization of super specifics like that, or like dates. That's just not the kind of learner that I am. I don't doubt that we have some people who are wired that way, but that's certainly not me. I think Svan is certainly closer to that than I am. Svan, do you have them all memorized, or do you know people that do?
No, I do not have it memorized. I find too that I have an app on my phone that gives me a daily Hávamál excerpt, and I find myself, going back. I found the translation that my mother had given me a long time ago, and I was like pouring into that for just you got to refresh your roots. And I think anybody that perhaps knows everything and memorizes everything, which is a testament to their discipline and their ability. But I like the fact that I don't have it memorized, because I'm constantly going back to it. And I sometimes retrospectively, which is even the worst. That's the salt in the wound, when it's like, oh my God, that absolutely applied to something that happened 2 years ago, and I was ignorant of that wisdom that was there the whole time. And I think that that's part of the beauty of it. But if somebody memorized it, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Again, the application of memorization is important too. I don't know. I think that when people utilize the Hávamál, obviously we've had people that try to utilize the Hávamál against us in ways, or levy things. I like it when people speak about the Hávamál in relation to applicable things, like when someone is scornful, cowardly, mocking, and we bring up the Hávamál with like an essence in mind that perhaps something is rooted in that. There are some broad moral statements in the Hávamál in which a noble soul should act a certain way. But you can clearly see too that even though they have cherry picked perhaps maybe one, they don't apply a lot of it. So that's another thing too, is being able to kind of consistently go back and forth and see where things apply. And so I call it's my living research. Again, every day an app, even sometimes reading it. And I don't mean to sound like a goody two-shoe or whatever. It's just I built this habit of doing it. And the Hávamál, I look perhaps even once per day, I will look at the Hávamál, but I haven't memorized it. And I don't think I ever will. I don't think I ever want to.
There's really different ways that people's minds are wired. And, I don't know that, I mean, there's clearly some that are ways that people's minds are wired. There's clearly some that are much better than others. There's obviously a hierarchy there. But there's also parallel ones that I don't know that one version's better of than the other. As far as the being able to memorize things that way, it's never been something that I've been able to do. But like my wife and I are really different that way. So when I'm reading a book, it takes me a very long time to read. There's this whole process of visualization and things when I'm reading. But Mandy can digest a book very quickly. And it baffles me. And sometimes I try to like stump her and think she's not, really getting the meat of it or what. No, she seems to be. She just processes information faster while reading than I do. And a lot of people have minds like that to where, they can read a book a day and just rip through stuff and listen to stuff on fast forward speed, and they can process data really, really different. But like Mandy is my go-to whenever, and this is the thing, as the Altair go through the Asatru Folk Assembly, when I need to find a Hávamál verse, my first step is, hey, Mandy, what's that verse about, whatever, and I'll approximate it as closely as I can. And she's my go-to that helps me out on that. So, everybody's a little bit different. And just for the record, I don't fault Christians that have their Bible memorized that well. I think that's fantastic that they have. It speaks well of them as people that they have that much of a commitment to their faith. I've seen a conversation over in the sidebar about fence sitters and such. I respect somebody that has a sincere faith in something, even if it's not something I agree with or like. If they're at least virtuous in their devotion to it and their sincerity, those are noble characteristics, and I can respect that a lot. It's the Christians that believe that's literally the words of their God, and they never bothered to read it. Those people I don't know how to wrap my head around. Folks that have it all super memorized. The one thing that I would caution that Svan mentioned, when you have to choose between them, the literal verbiage is less important than the lesson it's trying to impart. It's not just about memorizing words, it's about internalizing values and concepts and lessons. And that's very much, this is wisdom from on high. It is wisdom from the High One. And we would do well to heed it and to listen to it and to internalize it. And by going back over it, there's never a time that I've read through the Hávamál that I haven't been, looked at something a different way, applied something in a way that I hadn't previously, or found something relevant that I hadn't considered to a situation going on in my life. It's always good to go specifically, I would say our lore in general, but specifically the Hávamál is always very good to go back over and learn at different stages of your life when you're facing different challenges, and it'll speak to you in very different ways, I've found. Hi, this just in, $5 from Chris Lucat. Chris, thank you. We appreciate it. Svan, what is your Hávamál excerpt of the day app? I would like to have it.
Okay, I saw that come in and I was like, no, I can. So I believe it's called the Daily Hávamál. However, currently right now, my phone is at 0%. So give me a second and I'll be able to absolutely confirm it. But I believe it is called the Daily Hávamál, and it has the Elder Futhark around a Valknot on it. And I'll be able to confirm it in just a second. Let it get a little bit more, but yeah, I believe it's called the Daily Hávamál.
I believe that's what it's called as well. I'm not sure what verse is pulled up.
Yeah, the insignia or icon is like tan with a black Valknot on it.
So
And I'll give the honest and absolute answer in just a moment.
okay. In the meantime, is it not possible making someone your brother can be a mistake, like how the gods did with Loki? And one should be careful with these things. And that's back when we, Svan, when you were talking about folks calling everybody brother, like the Hulkster.
Yes, though, this question is great because it is, again, bringing up one of the overarching points of our stories. Not only are they cosmic or allegoric in the minutia of smaller things, they're also to be relatable in like tribal ethos. And yes, that is absolutely one of the lessons. It's not mentioned as to when or how or in what conditions Lord Woden made blood brotherhood with the Kinslayer, but that blood brother became a Kinslayer because he was the blood brother and slayed his brother's son. And as being a blood brother, that absolutely constitutes it as kinslaying, because once that was made, that brotherhood has to be viable especially if we're talking about cultural nuances. Back then, if you became a blood brother, all that applied to you as if you were born of the same mother, including kinslaying. And I think that's one of the beauties of our stories is that was that done? I don't know. I don't want to speak out of turn in the idea of saying did Lord Woden? Is it known? Did he do it on purpose because of that caveat? It's such a cool thing to think about. But ultimately, the stories, that's what it is teaching, is that you have to be careful about who you bring into your folk, who you bring into your realm, who you align with, and what level of alignment you have with them. And that could be a reflection of tribal ethos of the time. When we talk about Skadi, when we talk about Gerður, when we talk about Rindur, when we talk about Gríður, and all of their alignments towards joining the gods, it's very different than, like, say, for instance, the situation with Loki, and how they align and what those constitute as things. I think that's really important to pay attention to.
I think there's two concepts here. One is that idea of formal blood brotherhood, or, treating someone as a brother in a big way, in a substantial way. And I think that's one of those challenges. We don't want to be isolated. We want to be part of community, and we want to have people in our lives that are important to us. But doing that with wisdom and with your eyes open and with awareness, and not just willy-nilly and casually, treating close relationships with the gravity that they deserve. I think that we are wise to be cautious in having really, have lots of acquaintances, but few friends, or have lots of friends perhaps, but few people you call brother, few people that you treat as your family. And really be discerning about that. And I think that's part of it. I think letting, unworthy people into your inner guard is, obviously to be advised against. I don't think there's any perfect method of making that happen. I think, most of us that have built relationships in our life have been betrayed by people very close to us, unfortunately, and that's a tragedy. But I think it's part of, adulthood in the world that we live in. I think the other part of the question is the casual use of the term brother. And I do that all the time amongst the AFA and amongst our spiritual community, because I think it speaks to the fact that we're building a spiritual family. But I don't think we should let that, cloud us or think something's true that isn't. But yeah, I like to refer to, fellow members of the AFA as brothers and sisters. I think that's part of the AFA family that we're trying to build. I think a lot of people, I've people pick stuff to get upset about. Sometimes when people find this, if somebody's not Asatru or not whatever and calls them brother, they get all indignant. At the end of the day, it's a nice thing somebody's saying, and there's no reason to have a negative response to it. What it means is they see something in you that they're trying to associate with and feel kinship with, and ultimately it's complimentary. But just because somebody says brother it shouldn't mean that automatically lets you take down all of your walls and all of your precautions. One of the biggest, themes of the Hávamál is to keep your head on a swivel, keep your awareness about you. As we get further and it talks more about relationships, it'll have a lot more advice to, the Hávamál has a lot more advice for us. And I look forward to that in future weeks. And then what's the verse that says something about no one is so good that no fault is in them, or so bad as to be good for nothing? Everyone is known by halves or has both within them. Svan, are you familiar with what verse he is referring to?
Well, and I started looking because the way he's wording it is constructed very much like it isn't my favorite, but it is one of the really, really good ones, is verse number 39, where it's I never met a man so poor that never met a man so rich that he could not accept a gift, and I never met a man so poor that he could not ask for what he rightly deserved. And so it has that mirroring in the stanza. But the one about I've never met a man, there is something there, but I think it's that there's never a good man free of faults and never a bad man of no worth. And that's where I'm looking. And my biggest fear is that I would skip over it because kind of processing through them this fast. But I'm currently looking, so I don't have the exact one. And I went to 39 because of the way it was worded. And now
Yeah, that was going to be my go-to, and that's 71. Talks about how, but that's not really about a balance between good and evil. It's more of people who are disabled or deficient still have worth and value and can still find things to do that contribute to the success of their folk. And it juxtaposes that with how, but once you're dead, you can't do that. That as long as you still have the breath of life in you, there's things in this world you can do to benefit your people. And that's another one I find myself going to often it's just one that I find myself referencing in conversation. And that's in the translation we're reading tonight in Bellows, it's the lame rides a horse, the handless is herdsman, the deaf in battle is bold, the blind man is better than one that is burned. No good can come from a corpse. And that one I use, frequently when just in counseling or in dealing with folks. But I don't think that's the one you're after. So maybe we will hit on one that is a little bit closer in the upcoming weeks. I appreciate you guys being here tonight and participating with us. Svan, as always, it's a treat to have you on and sharing your wisdom with folks. Everyone looks very forward to these episodes that you're on. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having. I've been down and out for the last couple of days with an illness, so this was just so cool to kind of get back and feeling better and feeling excited and having good conversation. So thank you.
Well, good, and we will pick up at verse 31 next week. So please join us. Please get your friends, get anybody else who should be joining us to join us on that. And we'll look forward to talking to you then. Until next week, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA. And remember that victory never sleeps.
Good night, everybody.